Chapter 1107. As a brawny man who was over 2 meters tall and had arms thicker than an ordinary person's thigh, the barbarian warrior's movements were naturally not gentle. He pulled out the cork of the potion bottle and violently opened the mouth of one of the captives. He poured the potion into his mouth and shook the captive forcefully. "Hey, wake up. Tell me, what did you encounter?" Cough, 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 cough. Along with the violent coughing caused by choking, the exhausted man finally opened his eyes slowly. He covered his mouth and threw up on the ground. The potion had obviously stimulated his nerves and internal organs, so it seemed that his whole body was trembling slightly. The wounds on his body were constantly bleeding. There was no doubt that he had almost exhausted all his vitality. What he saw now was the final radiance of the setting sun. If he spoke for another 10 minutes or so, he would take his last breath. It was impossible for an adventurer who had been hovering on the edge of death all year round not to know what it meant to have such an early body condition. Therefore, the barbarian warrior did not waste any time and directly asked loudly, "Why did you kill each other? What kind of monsters did you encounter in the ruins?" "Ruins? Ha ha!" The wounded man struggled to stand up and laughed like a madman. As he laughed, he said to himself, "No, we didn't even enter the ruins. Those monsters, they can pretend to be your closest friends, deceive your trust, and then push the whole team bit by bit into the abyss of eternal damnation. Run. Run quickly. Don't go near them. Otherwise, you will die too." After saying the last word, he suddenly spat out a mouthful of blood from his mouth and fell to the ground with his face facing the sky. His eyes quickly lost their light. Damn it, he died before he could tell us everything he knew. The barbarian warrior complained helplessly. However, just as he was about to continue to wake the next captive, the woman whose age could not be determined suddenly stopped him. "Enough. Let them sleep. We already know enough." "What do you mean?" The warrior blinked his eyes with a confused look. "Sigh, if only your brain could be half as good as your skills, no, 1/3, or even 1/4, how good would that be?" The archer could not help but complain softly. The woman rolled her eyes at the two and took the initiative to explain. "It's very simple. He had just mentioned that there was a type of monster that was good at deception and disguise. This also means that the fratricide we saw not long ago was actually the collapse of their internal trust. No one knows if the other party is a monster in disguise. According to what you said, we should leave some marks on each other's bodies. If we find any suspicious behavior, we can use these marks to identify each other." The barbarian warrior scratched his head and said the countermeasures he had thought of. "Idiot! If it's really that easy to differentiate, how do you think these rotting corpses on the ground came about? Clearly, this monster isn't just disguising its appearance. It's very likely that it's also disguising its memories and habits." The woman clenched the wooden staff in her hand and analyzed very seriously. "Very likely. From now on, we'd better not split up, let alone act alone. Even if you're going to relieve yourself, at least make sure you're in a group of 2. At this point, the archer suddenly paused. He turned around and looked at Zhang Cheng, who had been standing there without saying a word. "Mister, can you please explain how you managed to cross the dangerous wasteland alone?" "Haha, why? Are you doubting me?" Zhang Cheng couldn't help but laugh. He couldn't remember when was the last time he was doubted, especially when these guys in front of him were ordinary people who he could destroy from body to soul with just a flick of his finger. "No, I just want to try my best to avoid unnecessary misunderstandings. After all, the place we're in now is slightly dangerous. It's necessary to maintain a certain level of vigilance." The archer obviously didn't know how dangerous and terrifying the creature he was talking to was. One of his hands was holding the bow tightly, while the other hand was placed on the quiver, ready to shoot at the fastest speed possible. "I admire your vigilance and courage, but forget about the explanation. I don't like to reveal my privacy to strangers. Since you think there's something wrong with me, then I'll leave alone. Finally, I wish you all good luck." After saying these meaningful words, Zhang Cheng pulled his hood tighter again and walked alone in the direction of the ruins that he had created with his own hands. He had a premonition that this adventurer team would soon pass the first level of the test, and enter the depths of the ruins to obtain the buried treasures. Watching Zhang Cheng's back gradually disappear into the distance, the archer finally let out a sigh of relief. He said to the other companions, "There's definitely something wrong with this person." His reaction was too calm. I don't believe that a traveler could remain unmoved after seeing what just happened. Maybe it's confidence? You have to understand that from his dressing and behavior, he's most likely a spellcaster. And as long as a spellcaster is strong enough, they have the means to deal with a group of monsters who are good at disguising and deceiving. The woman put forward a different opinion. No matter what, there's no harm in being careful. The archer shrugged and didn't try to refute anything. Being vigilant against strangers was the first rule of an adventurer's code of conduct. It was also the most important rule, because you would never know if the little girl with a cute smile on the side of the road was secretly a terrifying killer. You also didn't know if those seemingly pitiful beggars would suddenly pull out a sharp blade and directly pierce your heart. Trust was a stable relationship that could only be established through long-term observation and interaction. Any adventurer with a bit of intelligence would not easily trust a stranger they met for the first time, especially in an environment where danger lurked everywhere. These experienced adventurers didn't take this brief interlude to heart. After formulating a series of countermeasures, they abandoned the sleeping captives and advanced for a distance before setting up camp in a tree hole that was easy to defend but difficult to attack. They were very smart. They didn't approach the entrance of the ruins impatiently like most outsiders who had arrived here. Instead, they chose a place far away to rest for the night. As night fell, most of the team members were already lying by the campfire with their eyes closed to rest. Only 2 people stood guard at the door, vigilantly watching the movements outside. This was especially so for the archer. His nerves were stretched taut from beginning to end. As someone who had a strong sense of danger, he could sense that there were a few pairs of eyes hidden in the darkness observing them. Each of them was filled with undisguised malice. Chapter 1108. Old friend, do you feel it? Those damn monsters have already taken me as their prey. The archer sneered at the barbarian warrior who was leaning against a tree trunk and drinking soup from a bowl. The barbarian warrior put down the empty wooden bowl and pulled out his 2-handed sword that was emitting a cold light. He replied without hesitation, "It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what tricks they have up their sleeves, as long as we kill all those who dare to come close. I'm too lazy to distinguish between real and fake." "Huh, you're still as simple and crude as before. But this time, your simple and crude might be able to help us solve the problem at hand." After saying that, the archer suddenly stood up and took out an arrow from his quiver. He directly pulled the bowstring and aimed at the back of the forest and shot. Whoosh! Accompanied by the sound of the arrow piercing through the air, a scream suddenly rang through the night sky. Your archery is still as terrifying as before. Especially at night, you can always find the hidden enemy. The barbarian warrior grinned and praised without hesitation. One had to know that being able to hit 100% of the time during the day and being able to hit 100% of the time at night were 2 completely different concepts. The former only required enough training and experience, coupled with a little talent, so it was not difficult to achieve. However, the latter was simply appalling. No one knew how the archer was able to do it, not even the party members who had been adventuring together for many years. However, one thing was very clear. Once the archer pulled the bowstring and shot the arrow, the enemy basically had no chance of escaping. However, the interesting thing was that the archer's face did not show any joy after injuring the enemy. Instead, he narrowed his eyes and stared into the distance. After a full minute, he smiled bitterly and shook his head. "No, I didn't hit it. At least I didn't hurt it. The scream just now was a kind of disguise to lure us out of the tree hole. It seems that these monsters are far more sinister and cunning than we expected. I even suspect that they are smarter than us." "What? You didn't hit it?" The warrior stood up in surprise and walked out of the tree hole. He wrinkled his nose and sniffed the air. As a barbarian who came out of the mountains, his sense of smell was far from deteriorating severely like his cousins. He could smell blood from a distance. However, this time, he did not detect the smell of blood around him. In order to confirm that he was not mistaken, he suddenly took large strides and rushed to the place where the arrow had been shot. His movements were quick and hurried, and he did not give his teammates any time to react. By the time the archer regained his senses and shouted to stop, the warrior had already been completely swallowed by the darkness. About 2 or 3 minutes later, the barbarian raised the arrow that he had just shot and said in an incredulous tone, "Guess what I found?" At the end of the arrowhead, there was a curved blade that had occurred after the impact. Your arrows will hit the target 100% of the time, only hitting the shield or armor. Damn it! Stop right there. Stay where you are and don't come any closer. The archer's attention was clearly not on the arrow, and his tone was full of nervousness and vigilance. Even though the warrior had only disappeared for a few minutes, and there was no sound of fighting, he still felt that something terrible had happened. What do you mean? Are you suspecting that I'm a monster in disguise? The barbarian warrior widened his eyes in anger. However, the Sagittarius had no intention of bending the rules. He replied bluntly, "That's right. I suspect that you are a monster in disguise. Remember the rules we set a few hours ago? No matter what happens, no one is allowed to act alone. But you actually ran out alone and completely disappeared from my sight. Now, I can't confirm if you're still you. I'm sorry, my friend, but you have to stay outside the tree hole tonight." Damn it, just because of 2 or 3 minutes. Are you crazy? What kind of monster can silently kill a powerful warrior like me in 2 or 3 minutes? Even if it was a giant dragon, it would take a lot of effort to kill me. The warrior roared angrily. I have never doubted your combat ability, but the problem is that you have broken the rules, and I have to keep the danger out of the team. If you have, sit down immediately and throw away the weapon in your hand. The archer tried to dissuade the warrior as he pulled out another arrow. If the warrior dared to take another step forward, the archer would directly let the arrow in his hand go through his knee. As an experienced adventurer, he would not let his emotions get the better of him. He would not play with his life for the so-called friendship. A real adventurer group either had a common goal or was chasing after wealth, fame, and status, especially the latter, which accounted for the majority of adventurers. There was only one reason for them to go on an adventure: to earn money, to earn more money, so that they could enjoy a luxurious life for the rest of their lives. Needless to say, for this kind of people, maintaining a good friendship was only to obtain wealth faster and better. They would not sacrifice for their companions. No, I want to go in. Don't stop me, or else I won't be polite. The barbarian warrior roared crazily. I refuse. Before confirming your identity, I will not allow you to come close to the tree hole. The archer gave a firm denial. Just as the two of them were nervously facing each other, the few people in the tree hole who were dreaming were finally awakened. The woman rubbed her dry eyes and asked with an uncertain tone, "What happened? Are you going to kill each other?" "Of course not. It's this guy. He actually went against the established rules and left my sight for several minutes without permission. I can't confirm whether he is one of us or a monster." "What? He left your sight for a few minutes?" The woman's sleepiness suddenly disappeared, and she opened her mouth wide in shock. She could not imagine how someone could be so stupid as to know what was wrong, but still insist on doing it. "There's no other way. He rushed out directly, and when I came back to my senses, it was already too late. Tell me, what should we do now? How can we confirm that he is the person we know, or that the monster disguised as him?" The archer scratched his head in frustration, almost pulling his hair out. Damn it, this is why I hate those brainless warriors. Their actions are always full of surprises. The woman gritted her teeth and cursed as she opened her bag and rummaged through it. After a while, she took out a bottle of potion that emitted a faint purple light and threw it to the warrior in the distance. She ordered loudly, "Drink it. Immediately. Immediately. If you don't drink it after a minute, I will recognize you as a monster." Chapter 1109. What's this? The barbarian warrior picked up the potion that had fallen at his feet. He pulled out the cork and carefully sniffed it under his nose. His eyes were very cautious, completely different from before when he had lost control of his emotions. "Don't ask so many questions. You still have 30 breaths." The woman gave an ultimatum without hesitation. Her attitude was so resolute. One of her hands was shining with a halo of magic energy. Perhaps in the next second, she would start chanting a fatal spell. It must be known that once the chanting of a spell started, there was no way to stop halfway. Otherwise, not only would the caster suffer a serious backlash from the spell, but it would also lead to a series of unpredictable consequences. Time passed by slowly, minute by minute. Just as the 30-second countdown was about to end, the barbarian warrior suddenly threw away the potion in his hand and charged forward at lightning speed, trying to get rid of the woman who posed the greatest threat to him. But before he could even take a few steps, the archer who was waiting for him pulled the bowstring and released an arrow with a cold light. Whoosh! Pooh! Ah! Accompanied by a scream, his left eye was directly hit by the arrow. The intense pain caused him to fall to the ground. The skin on his body quickly cracked open, revealing a black body hidden within. Without a doubt, this was a skinning monster. Although the human skin had a strong defense comparable to armor, this kind of defense could not cover the eyes. Damn it! I knew it! The woman cursed in a low voice as she quickly completed the spell in her hand. The next second, a ball of acid with a pungent smell was shot out, fiercely smashing into the skinning monster's face. Although the damage from the magic acid was far from fatal, it forced the skinless monster to give up on the idea of charging head-on. Like a nimble monkey, it leaped onto a tree trunk and disappeared into the night in a few moments. Looking at the discarded skin on the ground, the archer's face suddenly became serious. Without turning his head, he asked, "What do we do now?" "Don't do anything. Just stay here and guard." Didn't you notice? The skin of the monster, just now, was abnormally hard. Normal weapons can't really hurt it. As for that idiot who rushed out, his corpse is most likely lying in a corner of the forest. I have repeatedly stressed that this is an unusual adventure, and that we must be extremely vigilant. But there are always some simple-minded idiots who think that the sword in his hand can defeat all enemies. After saying that, a trace of disdain flashed through the woman's eyes. She turned around and returned to the bonfire in the tree hole. She leaned against the tree trunk and closed her eyes to continue sleeping. For her, the more dangerous the environment was, the more she needed to rest. Otherwise, she would not be able to concentrate and release her spells at the critical moment, which would lead to the loss of a battle that she could have won. And the price of failure often meant death, or something even more terrifying than death. But just because she could fall asleep, it didn't mean that the rest of the team could as well. The sleepiness of the remaining members, including the archer, had long disappeared. Instead, it was replaced by depression and depression. They couldn't believe that the barbarian warriors, who were skilled in martial arts, were killed by the terrifying monsters in less than a few minutes after rushing into the darkness. Even their skin was peeled off. Just like that, with the intense fear of the unknown and death, the group stayed awake the entire night. When the sun rose again the next morning, bringing light and warmth to the world, the group finally let out a sigh of relief. They took their weapons and equipment and left the cave. They were very alert as they searched the surrounding bushes. About 20 minutes later, they suddenly saw a bloodied, skinless corpse hanging from the trunk of a tree. There was even a sharp arrow stuck in the corpse's eye. There is no need to ask to know that this was the work of the skinless monster that was injured last night. It was using this method to provoke the members of the adventurer team, hoping that they would lose their minds and chase after it. This way, it would be able to use its familiarity with the terrain to defeat them one by one. Then, it would put on the skin of the other adventurer team and toy with them until they had a mental breakdown, just like how it toyed with the other adventurer teams. But unfortunately, this team was obviously different from the previous ones. The relationship between the members was not very close. The archer, who was good at observation and tracking, carefully examined the corpse and quickly explained, the cause of death was a heavy blow to the head. The monster's strength was obviously very strong. It was strong enough to knock down a strong barbarian warrior in an instant and knock him unconscious. But what I'm more interested in is the skinning technique. Skinning technique? The woman raised her eyebrows in surprise. That's right. Look at the exposed muscle tissue. When the monster skinned, it did not damage the tissue beneath the skin. Even the bleeding was pitifully small. This means that this is not the first time it has done this. I even suspect that the reason it skinned was to put on the skin and disguise itself as the dead. The archer explained calmly. I see. That monster can kill a person and then put on the skin to disguise itself as the victim. It might even be able to perfectly imitate the voice, movements, and habits of the victim, the woman said thoughtfully. The archer nodded seriously. Your deduction is very close to the truth. Now we have to think of a way to get rid of these monsters once and for all. I don't want to sleep with one eye open every night. I don't want to wake up to find that my teammates have been replaced by monsters. Then what do you think we should do? The woman's eyes flashed with a dangerous light. It's very simple. Since those monsters see us as prey, why don't we set a trap and let them know that in this wasteland, the hunter and the prey are not always the same. Sometimes, the prey can become the hunter, and the hunter can be killed by the prey. The archer narrowed his eyes and revealed a cruel smile. Although on the surface, he still maintained absolute calmness. His eyes revealed the flames of anger and hatred. Since you have a plan, then go ahead and do it. Don't forget the team's motto. We will not deliberately seek revenge for anyone, but we will not easily let go of any enemies who have killed our comrades. Death is not scary. What is scary is becoming numb. After saying these meaningful words, the woman gave the rest of her companions a look. They began to search the surrounding forest in pairs until they had completely eliminated all potential dangers. Then, they began to move in an orderly manner. Chapter 11:10. What do you think of this team of adventurers? Especially that woman. Standing in the deepest part of the underground ruins, Zhang Cheng observed the other party's every move through long-range surveillance magic while asking the specter behind him. Or rather, it was a special life created by the law of death. She has great potential, master. The specter replied with a voice that seemed to come from the deepest part of the distorted void. After all, the reason why he was created was to maintain the normal operation of the entire huge maze, and at the same time, to select suitable people to enter the lowest level and pull out the holy sword stuck in the stone. Zhang Cheng smiled and sighed. Yes, she has great potential, especially after encountering an unexpected situation. Her calmness, or even coldness, simply made me a little amazed. You have to understand that mortals are easily swayed by emotions and impulses. Most of the time, they are unable to maintain their calm and do impulsive things that are disadvantageous to themselves. This is also why those who can control their emotions are often more likely to succeed. But what makes me curious is that this team seems to have their own set of rules and regulations. According to the information I have collected these days, this is a rather famous team. They call themselves the Dark Believers, meaning that they are lunatics who are willing to do anything for power and money. Among them, the one that left the deepest impression was that a few years ago, they accepted an Avenger and spread a plague in a port city, directly causing the entire city to be wiped out and completely turned into a gathering place for the undead. The Spectre straightforwardly told him everything he knew. One must know that as a manager, not only could he control all the mechanisms, traps, and puzzles in the city, he could also control the monsters that were placed here. Therefore, all the memories that the Skinners stole were all copied and stored by him, in case of an emergency. Dark Believers? It sounds like they believe in an evil god. Zhang Cheng stroked his chin and showed an interested expression. After all, there were too many stories praising heroes of light, so much that he was already tired of it. Perhaps it was time to cultivate a dark hero and use another way to bring a little change to this world. The Spectre obviously did not possess complex emotions and replied with a cold voice. No, Master, this world does not have a god. At least until now, I have not discovered the existence of a god. All the statues enshrined in the shrines are, in essence, the imagination of mortals towards a power they cannot understand. A god, is not necessarily a powerful life form with some kind of supernatural power. It is also possible that a god is an amalgamation of countless desires and obsessions. In many myths and legends, mortals were created by gods, but in reality, many gods were created by their own fanatical believers. Faith was a complicated thing. Some people interpreted it as a transaction between mortals and gods, while others thought it was a kind of energy, a kind of power. But I feel that God is actually just a mortal's fantasy of their most perfect image. He could be strong, but he could also be weak. He could be crazy, but he could also be rational. He could be benevolent, but he could also be cold. In particular, creating a god of darkness was much easier than creating a god of justice. After all, crossing the darkness and walking towards the light is an incomparably difficult path, but abandoning the light and falling into the darkness is very easy. When he said this, Zhang Cheng's tone revealed a little bit of excitement. The more he observed, the more he found that the target he chose had an indescribable, unique charm, as if the fragrance of darkness was emitted from the depths of her soul. This woman was not a completely selfish and evil person, nor was she a rebellious young girl. As long as there was something that went against the mainstream values and morals, she would find it very cool and would be willing to try it herself. On the contrary, she knew what kindness, what love, and what positive emotions were, but she resolutely chose to abandon the former and stepped onto the path of darkness. Then what kind of test do you want to give her? The specter obviously would not go against the intention of her creator and began to plan to give this trial participant a little special care after entering the ruins. Zhang Cheng hesitated for a moment and soon ordered casually, "Let's have a show of friendship and betrayal. Everything is especially precious only when there is sacrifice and sacrifice. Let her choose between power and her teammates, and see if she is willing to sacrifice her teammates for the holy sword, or sacrifice the holy sword for her teammates. If it is the former, then I think she's qualified to become a believer of darkness. Isn't that right? As you wish. I will let her understand what kind of awareness is needed to become a true believer of darkness." After saying this, the specter bowed deeply, and then her whole body rapidly became transparent and finally dissipated into the air. At the same time, in the forest far away from the ruins, a massacre of the hunter and the prey was taking place. As the skinning monsters that had wreaked havoc on this land for a long time, this time they finally met a difficult opponent. In less than half an hour, at least 3 unlucky ones fell into the traps and were smashed to death by the members of the adventurer team who were waiting by the side. Although their hard skin could help them resist the sharp swords, the violent impact of the blunt weapons could directly damage the brain and internal organs. In the end, after a few hammer blows, even the strongest skinning monster would die on the spot. Relying on the terrifying destructive power of the blunt weapons, the originally small number of skinning monsters quickly lost more than half of their numbers and fled the forest full of traps with fear. Without a doubt, this was the first time they tasted failure since their birth, and also the first time they realized that their disguise ability was not omnipotent. As long as the other party maintained their elven form, and with an effective battle plan, they could easily cause heavy casualties. Seeing the skinless monster return to its original form and run away like a monkey, the woman couldn't help but purse her lips. She sneered and said sarcastically, "This is the terrifying monster that wiped out countless adventurer teams? Looks like it's not a big deal. Let's go, it's time to enter the ruins and find the treasure we're really looking forward to." "As you wish, my lady." The Sagittarius bowed deeply, pretending to exaggerate. However, it was not hard to tell from his eyes that he was actually a little afraid of the only spellcaster and female member of the team. Because the skinning monsters had all gone into hiding, the team only paid the price of losing one member to reach the magnificent but slightly dilapidated entrance of the ruins. The woman walking at the front did not say anything and directly walked through the dim stairs, arriving at an even larger underground area. Chapter 11:11. This place is spectacular. As soon as they arrived at the entrance of the underground ruins, the woman was captivated by the huge stone pillars covered in moss. Even though the surface of the stone pillars was covered in moss and mushrooms, one could still observe the exquisite carvings and the energy attached to them. As a spellcaster, She could clearly feel that each of the stone pillars was connected by a unique magical power, thus forming a tight defense. It was also because of this that the ruins didn't collapse after more than half of the stone pillars collapsed and maintained the original basic structure. In contrast, the archer was more concerned about the possible mechanisms, traps, and monsters in the surroundings. He bent down and carefully examined the footprints on the ground. Finally, he warned in a solemn tone, "We'd better be careful. These footprints only show the people who went in, and none of them came out. This also means that anyone who went in didn't make it out alive in the end. Doesn't this prove that the treasures that should belong to us are still intact inside?" The woman's eyes emitted a bone-chilling glint. She was so thirsty, like a spider entrenched in a web, exuding the unique aura of a predator. Without a doubt, this was the true face of her dark believer, a lunatic who dared to do anything for power and wealth. Sigh. I hope there won't be too many deaths this time. The archer sighed slightly and swept a sympathetic glance at his new teammates who were clueless about their tragic fate. The Dark Believer team wasn't an ordinary adventurer team. It was a legendary team that had almost 100% completion rate. As long as they could survive until the end of the mission, they would definitely be able to receive a rather generous reward. In particular, they dared to accept evil missions that ordinary adventurers didn't dare to touch at all. In the eyes of some people, they were simply the perfect blade that could complete part of the shady schemes. It was also because of this that no matter how many members the team lost, it wasn't too difficult to replenish them. After all, most adventurers knew that even though it was dangerous to be a member of the Dark Believer team, they could also make a fortune. But what they didn't know was that most of the time, this danger didn't come from the outside, but from the inside. It came from a woman who never claimed to be the leader, but always firmly held the highest authority. Of course, just like before, his worries quickly became reality. When they crossed a bridge that was invisible to the naked eye, the woman used her two teammates as cannon fodder without thinking and went to check if there were any traps in the middle. In the end, as expected, one of the unlucky fellows suddenly lost his footing and fell into the bottomless abyss when he was about to reach the other side, and he lost his life on the spot. Not only did the woman not show any signs of sadness, she even urged the rest of the people to continue moving forward. The deeper she went into the maze, the more she could feel a strong calling, as if there was something waiting for her in the deepest part of the ruins. At the same time, another adventurer team a few tunnels away had also successfully passed all the tests and stood in front of a black metal door. The leader of the group was a handsome young man with short golden hair and was clad in armor. He nodded at the four injured teammates behind him, then strode forward and placed his hand on the tab. In an instant, the tightly shut door slowly opened a crack, and an illusory black shadow descended from the sky. A low and hoarse voice came from his mouth. "Welcome, adventurers from afar. First of all, I would like to congratulate you for being able to stand out in the trial. But at the same time, I would like to remind you that the closer you are to the Holy Sword, the stronger the opponents and enemies you will encounter. In order to praise your performance, I will now give you a choice that will allow you to leave with wealth and power." As the last word left his mouth, the black shadow suddenly opened his arms and summoned a large box filled with gold, silver, jewelry, and magical items. Pointing at the priceless items in the box, he continued, speaking unhurriedly. "You can give up looking for the Holy Sword and choose to take everything in this box with you, safely returning to your own world. But if you choose to continue moving forward, then all the treasures will not be with you. After all, this world has never been perfect. If you want to obtain something, you must pay the price. Tell me, what is your choice? Do you still need to ask? Of course, we will choose the Holy Sword." The young man wiped his sweat-drenched hair and grinned excitedly. "Are you sure? Of course. My companions and I are not doing this for money or wealth. We want to become heroes of light who defeat evil and be respected by the world, just like how bards sing all kinds of songs." "Well said. We must find the Holy Sword and kill that evil tyrant. For the glory of the kingdom." The young man's impassioned emotions had undoubtedly infected the entire team, so no one was confused by the valuable treasures in front of them. Compared to a divine weapon, mere gold, silver, treasures, and magical items were obviously far from enough. The essence of any intelligent creature was greed and the endless pursuit of desire. If they did not have such an essence, they would not have been able to develop bit by bit from the primitive era and finally step into the palace of civilization. Knowing that they were only one step away from the best things, most people would not choose to retreat. Even if they knew that there was great danger ahead, they would still take a step forward without hesitation. It was easy to know one's own limitations and retreat bravely, but there were not many people who could really do it. Looking at the adventurers in front of him who did not waver at all, the Black Shadow nodded lightly. All right, since this is your choice, then come in. Remember, from now on, you will not only face monsters, mechanisms, traps, and puzzles. There will also be adventurers who will enter the last part of the game like you. Everyone will have a fight to the death in a fair environment, and the final winner will be qualified to enter the room where the Holy Sword is. You mean we have to kill each other? The golden-haired young man's eyes widened, an expression of disbelief on his face. Yes, not only will you kill each other, you will also have to make some of the most difficult decisions in life. Believe me, that kind of pain and despair is not something most people can bear. Wonderful Book House. Chapter 11-12. Light and Darkness, Good and Evil. What an interesting scene. I'm looking forward to the interesting phenomenon that will happen when they clash. Zhang Cheng, who was sitting in the deepest part of the maze, couldn't help but reveal an interested expression as he watched the scene transmitted back from the magic mirror. It was obvious that he had deliberately chosen these two teams to satisfy some wicked interest in his heart. However, this time, darkness would triumph over light, bringing pain and despair to the entire world. As for the holy sword he had created, it would also produce special attributes of light and holiness, or darkness, and evil the moment the user touched it. In fact, he didn't really care whether the person who pulled out the sword was good or evil. He only cared if the other party could follow his instructions and complete this wonderful show. Of course, a small part of it was just a game to pass the time. One had to know that the greatest enemy of a life form with an almost endless lifespan was loneliness, because there was no other life form that could accompany him through the long and endless journey of life. No matter if it was his family, friends, or spiritual partner, they would all disappear in the end without exception, becoming insignificant passers-by in his life. Over time, the longer one's lifespan, the easier it would be for them to become isolated. They had to do things to make themselves more cheerful. For example, some rulers were passionate about spreading knowledge, helping primitive life forms that were still in a state of ignorance walk towards civilization. There were also some who directly joined the battle and formed a super civilization, constantly waging wars and realizing their deep understanding of the universe. Zhang Cheng, on the other hand, was rather special. He liked to dig out the dark side of human nature. He wanted to see how many people could unleash the most brilliant brilliance of their souls when they were in extreme desperation and awaken their numb compatriots with tragic sacrifices. However, even if they failed, he would still be able to see a wonderful show. Master, these two teams are going to meet soon. Do you need me to balance out their numbers? Spectre asked cautiously as he stood not too far behind Linley. Zhang Cheng smiled and shook his head. No, there's no need. Sometimes, luck is also a part of one's strength. Excessive pursuit of the so-called balance was, in fact, the greatest imbalance. Don't do anything. Just let everything flow naturally. Understood. Spectre bowed, and then disappeared without a trace. Obviously, he had already gone to arrange the first round of tests for the two adventurer teams. About 10 minutes later, when both teams entered a circular arena at the same time, they couldn't help but start cursing. My God, what was that? A dragon. Oh no. Damn it. Retreat. Quickly retreat. Otherwise, we'll all die. Damn it. Look, there seems to be another adventurer team over there. What should we do? Strike first and gain the advantage? Or should we try to join forces with them? Just when everyone was in a state of panic, the specter appeared out of thin air again and announced in an emotionless tone, The first round of the test. A test of strength. Everyone who enters the grand arena must kill the dragon within 15 minutes. Otherwise, you will fail the trial and become the dragon's dinner. Just as he finished speaking, he cast a spell on the sleeping black dragon. In the next second, who is it who dares to disturb the great Arius's beautiful dream? The dragon that woke up from its slumber opened its bloody mouth and roared angrily. Its tail and wings flapped restlessly, sending sand and stones flying. Bastard. Opposite. I think we should join forces to deal with the crisis in front of us. What do you think? The archer cursed softly and immediately sent an invitation to the blond youth standing at the other entrance more than 100 meters away. The latter didn't hesitate and immediately replied without thinking. No problem. You take the left side, we'll take the back. Today, let's join forces and be dragon slayers. Happy cooperation. Happy cooperation. In just a few words, the two sides had already reached a verbal agreement. As the saying went, almost everyone was forced into their current state by life, so the greater the external pressure, the easier it was for them to reach a compromise. No matter how big the conflict or hatred between them was, they had to solve the threat of the external conflict first. Through the magic mirror, Zhang Cheng undoubtedly saw this scene clearly. He couldn't help but praise with a smile. Smart approach. But if they think they can easily become dragon slayers, then they're gravely mistaken. Before he could finish his words, the dragon opened its mouth and spat out a mouthful of deadly shadow flames. One of the shield warriors couldn't dodge in time and was reduced to ashes on the spot. Not even a complete corpse and bone fragments were left behind. What was more terrifying was that after the breath ended, the black dragon swung its thick and powerful tail and whipped two people down. It pounced on them and tore open their mouths with its sharp claws. It dug out their beating hearts and threw them into its mouth and chewed. Oliver, seeing his good friend burned into a pile of charcoal, the blond youth instantly lost his cool and rushed forward with his sword in an attempt to avenge his friend. But before he could get close, the rebounded tail slapped him in the face and he fell to the ground. If not for the protection of the helmet, his head would have been smashed. But this wasn't the end. As a dragon, what was the most powerful weapon? Some would say it was the deadly breath. Some would say it was the huge warning and the ability to fly freely in the sky. And some would say it was the sturdy dragon scales that couldn't be damaged by ordinary swords. But what they didn't know was that these were all the same. The truly terrifying thing was when the dragons began to learn profound magical knowledge or skillful martial arts. And this black dragon who called himself Arius was a magic user with decent strength. After dealing with the fellows who tried to smash its scales with their weapons, the dragon immediately entered a state of spell-casting focus. Complicated dragon patterns were constantly spewing out of its mouth. It didn't take long for at least 3 defensive spells and 2 buff spells to be completed. Through the dim light, one could vaguely see that the black dragon's body had obviously doubled in size. Its 2 eyes flashed with a bloodthirsty and cruel red light. It can cast magic? The archer noticed this scene, and his mouth was wide open. He couldn't close it for a long time. Chapter 11:13. Idiot. Dragons are natural-born spellcasters. Their innate magical powers are far beyond your imagination. The woman sneered. She then carefully curled up behind the stone pillar, fearing that the enraged dragon would suddenly change the direction of its attack and spit a deadly breath in her direction. She could clearly feel that the slightly dark flames contained extremely terrifying magical energy. As long as she came into contact with it, her body and soul would immediately be incinerated. Then what should we do now? The archer was obviously used to such an attitude. He also stuck close to the stone pillar and asked without turning his head. To be honest, if he knew that there was a dragon behind the door, he would definitely take the treasures and magical items in a box and leave instead of falling into such a dilemma. Even though he wasn't the one being attacked by the dragon, he still felt an unprecedented sense of danger. That's right, it was a sense of crisis, because it was not difficult to determine from the name of the trial of strength that this was a test that required a head-on confrontation. Either become a glorious dragon-slaying warrior, or become another charred corpse that fell under the feet of the evil dragon. Of course, as a mercenary, he did not immediately launch an attack from the left wing like he had promised. Instead, he hid himself and patiently observed the black dragon's every move, trying to find some patterns or weak points. It had to be said that this behavior of abandoning an ally in battle was very sinister, but at the same time, very smart. Looking at the other team that suffered heavy casualties, it was clear how wise their choice was. It had only been a few minutes since the beginning of the battle, and the golden-haired young man only had 2 teammates left. The rest were either burned to death by the flames or torn into pieces by the sharp teeth and claws. They were thrown into the air like broken rag dolls and fell to the ground fiercely, spitting out mouthfuls of black blood. The cruel reality once again proved that in the face of absolute power, all head-on confrontations without using one's brain was the same as courting death. If such a situation happened in the wild, the team of Dart believers would definitely be very happy to hide and watch the show. They would wait for the other party to die before coming out to see if they could take advantage of the situation. But now, they were trapped in the same sealed space with the other party. If the other party died, the enraged dragon would immediately attack them. So even if it was for their own sake, they had to try their best to preserve as much combat power as possible. There is no doubt that whether it was the ruthless woman or the archer who was good at disguising himself, they were not stupid and short-sighted people. On the contrary, they knew better than anyone else what they should do at this time. Thus, the 2 of them exchanged glances and walked out from behind the stone pillar at the same time. One of them drew his bow and shot an arrow, while the other began to chant an incantation, preparing to release a spell to divert the black dragon's attention and buy time for the other team of survivors. Very accurate judgment. I was beginning to appreciate this group of self-proclaimed dark worshippers. Do you know? Darkness and evil did not mean that one was short-sighted and selfish. Sometimes, learning to work together with the enemy was not necessarily a bad choice. Unfortunately, most people who walked on this path firmly believed that everyone else was wrong, and only they were right. Therefore, it was inevitable that they would walk on the path of making everyone their enemy. But I see another possibility in them. Admiring the scene of the 2 teams fighting against the black dragon in the magic mirror, Zhang Chun commented with great interest. As a lunatic who embraced darkness from his body to his soul, he knew better than anyone else the biggest weakness of those who walked on this path. That was, they placed too much emphasis on themselves and neglected the feedback of the surrounding environment. And such behavior was bound to attract countless enemies. In more serious cases, it would develop to become the enemy of the entire world. Although it sounded cool to be the enemy of the entire world, in fact, it did not feel good at all to be beaten to death. Unless one had an overwhelming advantage, one would not be able to hold on for long. That was also why in most stories, the evil ones were always defeated by the righteous heroes. It was not that the heroes were powerful, but the evil ones misjudged the situation and gradually turned the original advantage into a disadvantage. It would be strange if they did not lose. Master, are you sure you want to maintain the current strength? According to my estimation, it is impossible for these few people to defeat the dragon that you created. The spirit asked in a hollow voice. Zhang Chun smiled and shook his head. No, there's no need. You have to understand that heroes are heroes because they can achieve feats that ordinary people can never imagine. Be patient. I believe that you should be able to see some interesting scenes in no time. As soon as he finished speaking, the woman who had been in a state of concentration finally opened her eyes. Her pupils were flashing with a terrifying red light. The next second, a red lightning bolt shot out from her fingertips. Pa! The moment the lightning bolt hit the black scales, the dragon twitched violently. Blood kept oozing out of its nose, mouth, and the corners of its eyes. It looked abnormally terrifying. This is a divine spell. A god answered her prayers? The spirit showed an expression of disbelief. No, this is not a divine spell, nor did a god answer her prayers. She resonated with the power of darkness in the most fundamental and most direct way. Unbelievable. No wonder she called herself a believer of darkness. Zhang Qing narrowed his eyes and muttered to himself. His tone revealed a strong sense of excitement. There was no doubt that this was a true believer of darkness, a noble soul who saw darkness as her lifelong pursuit and ideal and was willing to give up everything for it, including her life and soul. Only in this way could a mortal's body resonate with the essence of darkness and obtain the corresponding feedback and blessings. Under the influence of the pure power of darkness, even a dragon with strong magic resistance would inevitably be severely injured. If it was hit again, the black dragon would become a lifeless corpse. Despicable maggot, you actually hurt the great Arius. I will tear you apart. The black dragon that was created by humans obviously did not have the knowledge and wisdom that a real dragon had accumulated over time. It immediately opened its bloody mouth and spat out a ball of black and red flames. The extremely corrosive shadow energy burned the stone pillar into a strange black viscous liquid in the blink of an eye. Chapter 11:14. Damn it! Be careful. The archer, who had personally witnessed the fate of being hit by the black and red dragon's breath, shouted and rushed over. He pushed the woman to the ground and dodged the famous black dragon's flame by a hair's breadth. Even so, he was still drenched in cold sweat. He hurriedly rolled on the ground several times before quickly getting up. Thanks. I owe you a favor. The woman followed closely behind. She also got up in a sorry state and went behind another stone pillar. This lucky person who had been blessed by the dark forces was no longer as calm and arrogant as she usually was. Not only was her face frighteningly pale, but her eyes were also showing undisguised exhaustion. One must know that the powerful spell she had just cast had almost exhausted all her magic and energy. It was very difficult for her to even stay awake. She did not have the energy to launch a second attack. From a certain point of view, she was now a burden who couldn't even walk properly. The archer deliberately did not look at the woman's weak appearance. He pretended to be relaxed and teased. That's great. It's not easy to make you owe me a favor. Perhaps after this adventure is over, we can find a private time to talk about how to repay this favor. Sure, as long as we can return alive. The woman smoothed her hair and pursed her lips in response. It was obvious that even though the situation was not good, they had not given up hope. They still believed that they had a chance to pass the trial of strength. At the same time, the other team was in a much more miserable situation. Only 2 members were left alive. The blonde youth who led the team exuded a solemn mood. His eyes shone with determination and the courage to face death unflinchingly. Having seen his teammates die one by one in battle, he had obviously given up hope of survival. There was only one reason to stay alive, and that was revenge. Honor, sacrifice, justice, pity, humility, courage, honesty. The noble qualities of the heroes in the stories appeared in the young man's mind one after another. Suddenly, he realized that this was his burial ground. It was also the place where his soul would be sublimated. He might not be able to defeat the powerful black dragon, but he could create an opportunity for the other team to pass the trial and return to the human world with the holy sword. Thinking of this, the tragic expression on the blonde youth's face gradually disappeared and was replaced by a kind of calmness, as if he had accepted the arrangement of fate. He raised his weapon and began to chant the tune that his parents often hummed in his ears when he was a child. His heavily injured companion seemed to have realized this as well. He couldn't help but shed tears of excitement. Enduring the pain, he puffed up his chest and took the lead to charge forward. This was because he knew what his good friend wanted to do. He planned to use his own body and life to create an opportunity for him. Get lost. Annoying bug. The black dragon roared and raised its sharp claws, piercing through the opponent's chest and violently tearing the corpse into pieces. However, just as it was venting its anger without restraint, the golden-haired young man seized the fleeting opportunity. Facing the splattering blood and minced meat, he directly pierced his sharp long sword into the giant dragon's pale yellow eye. Puff! Ah! Lowly worm! How dare you hurt the great me? Go to hell. All of you, go to hell. Accompanied by a deafening roar that suddenly reverberated in the empty hall, the black dragon began to spew flames in all directions, as if it had gone mad, venting its powerful destructive spells. In less than a few minutes, the originally dilapidated hall had completely turned into ruins. As for the young man who had blinded the dragon's eye, he was already dead. Not even a complete piece of his corpse could be found. However, his sacrifice had bought enough time for the team of dark believers, especially the woman who was a spellcaster. She forcibly overdrew her physical strength and magic to complete another dark spell, injecting the power of darkness into the giant dragon's body. Under the unparalleled destructive power, the internal organs of the black dragon were forcibly chewed up. In the end, it fell to the ground with a loud bang, never to get up again. In the end, the two teams of more than 10 people were almost wiped out. Only 3 people survived. Looking at the corpse of the ancient giant beast not far in front of them, the archer let out a deep breath and sighed with a bitter smile. I can't believe that we can actually become living dragon-slaying warriors. Yeah, unbelievable. But the return is also quite amazing. Not to mention anything else, just this giant dragon's corpse alone is enough to make us rich. Dragon scales, dragon horns, dragon blood, dragon bones, every part of its body is the best magical material that is hard to come by. Someone will be willing to pay a high price to buy it. Another member of the team of dark believers stood up excitedly and kept circling around the black dragon's corpse. Although there were several wounds on his body that were still bleeding, he still couldn't suppress the excitement in his heart. Well, don't be so happy. Don't forget, that guy just said that this is the trial of strength. This also means that the next trial is likely to be about intelligence, spirit, and so on. We'd better take a rest and recover our physical strength quickly to prepare for the possible battle. The woman reminded weakly. What? There's more. The archer was frightened and let out a shrill scream. He felt that with the current state of the 3 of them, not to mention a high-intensity battle, even a few low-level adventurers could possibly kill them all. Just as the woman was about to open her mouth to say something, the specter once again appeared out of thin air and announced in his usual emotionless tone, "Congratulations, you have successfully passed the trial of strength. Now, you have a day to rest, and after a day, you will welcome the trial of the heart." Trial of the heart? The archer suddenly had a bad premonition and raised his head to stare at the specter that was emitting black fog all over his body. As the name suggests, it is a trial of the spirit. Hidden in every mortal's heart is another self, a secondary personality that is completely opposite to the main personality. But most of the time, it is forcibly suppressed. What you have to do is to talk to it face to face and either persuade it or defeat it. A person whose heart is not firm enough is not qualified to draw the holy sword. After saying this meaningful sentence, the specter directly disappeared on the spot, leaving behind the 3 fellows with extremely ugly expressions. There is no doubt that although the trial of the heart was not like the trial of strength, where one had to deal with a powerful giant dragon, the degree of danger was not small at all. On the contrary, as long as there was the slightest mistake in the process, one was likely to be replaced by a completely opposite personality. Chapter 11:15. There were no flashes of swords, nor were there any fierce battles. As the trial of the heart officially began, the 3 participants quickly entered the deepest corner of their consciousness that they had never touched before. Although they looked very calm on the surface, as if they had fallen asleep, each of them was actually engaged in the most dangerous battle. But this time, the enemy they had to face was no longer a powerful dragon, but another version of themselves, an opponent without any privacy or secrets. After some time, when the woman was the first to open her eyes, she suddenly pulled out a dagger and stabbed it into the chest to the other 2 teammates. Puff! Puff! Scarlet blood suddenly gushed out, and not long after, they twitched and breathed their last. Looking at the pale faces of the 2 who had lost their vitality, she sighed slightly and muttered to herself in a voice that only she could hear, "I'm sorry. I have to do this." Only this way can I ensure that nothing goes wrong. For this moment, I've lost too much, so I have to succeed no matter what. Tell me, what do you see in the depths of your heart? The spirit appeared in midair, staring at her with two eyes that were as deep as a black hole, and asked softly, I came to internal strife, fighting, and death. No one could resist the temptation of holding the sacred sword, and in the end, I could only kill the other two, and the winner would get it. The woman did not try to hide anything, and openly stated the reason why she killed her companions. From the beginning to the end, she did not show the slightest sadness or regret. She looked so calm that it was somewhat frightening. Fortunately, the spirit was not a normal life form, but a special life form that was between an energy body and an undead. It did not have any ethical or moral restrictions, nor did it have any emotions like fear. It just nodded very calmly, and then raised its right hand to point at the open passage next to it. Congratulations, you've passed the trial of the heart. Next, you just need to complete the last trial, and then you can go to the room where the sacred sword is. The last trial? The woman frowned subconsciously. After all, she had killed almost all the participants in the first two trials, and she was not sure if she had enough strength and energy to deal with the unknown danger. Relax. The last trial does not require fighting, and you don't need to think too much. You just need to answer a few questions, and that's enough. After saying that, the spirit led the way through the deep and dark passage and disappeared into the darkness. Damn it. I hate this kind of situation where I don't know anything and can only listen to other people's arrangements obediently. The woman gritted her teeth and grumbled in a low voice, but still followed obediently. In fact, at this point, she no longer had any room to retreat. She was like a gambler who had bet almost everything she had. Even if she knew that she would lose, she would still choose to fight to the death. With nervousness, anticipation, and apprehension, she soon arrived at a room that was burning with countless magical flames. In the middle of the room, there was a 4-meter-tall statue of a demon god. In front of the statue stood a person. However, due to the refraction of the light, he couldn't see the other party's face clearly for the time being. He only had a feeling of déjà vu, huh? You really didn't disappoint me. You finally passed all the tests and came here. The mysterious man took off his hood, revealing an extremely young face. It was Zhang Cheng, who had been waiting for a long time. It's you. The woman was shocked, her eyes filled with disbelief. Yes, it's me. Zhang Cheng nodded slightly. Do you know? From the first time we met, I had a premonition that you would become the chosen hero, a hero of darkness that was different from the heroes of light in most stories. Because you have such qualifications, you are favored by the power of darkness. I don't understand what you mean. The woman subconsciously took 2 steps back. As a very sensitive person, she hated the condescending look in the other party's eyes, as if he was looking at a lamb to be slaughtered. She hated the embarrassment of being played in the palm of someone's hand even more. Ha ha, you don't understand? I think you don't want to understand. Zhang Cheng laughed and exposed the other party's little trick. He turned around and gently stroked the huge statue of the demon god behind him. Take this statue as an example. More than 1,500 years ago, it was the totem of a glorious empire. It was a god of darkness that almost awakened from the chaos. But unfortunately, at the most critical time, the empire collapsed from the inside and split into countless forces. They fought and killed each other, and finally formed the current political structure of the continent. God of Darkness. When the woman heard this term, an incomparably fanatical light shot out from her eyes. She stared straight at the dilapidated stone statue. Yes, he is the God of Darkness, Lua. The only God in this world that is closest to awakening. Even now, as long as someone calls out his name, they will receive a mysterious energy feedback. It is waiting for a believer to awaken his consciousness, allowing him to awaken from his ignorance and bring true faith to the world. Tell me, are you willing to take on this responsibility and raise the holy sword high to accomplish an unprecedented feat? When he said this, Zhang Cheng's tone was filled with endless temptation. Without a doubt, he knew very well what this woman truly desired in the depths of her heart. At the same time, he also knew what kind of things she could not refuse. To awaken a god of darkness with one's own hands, this was almost a supreme goal and glory for a mortal who claimed to be a believer of darkness. For a moment, the woman felt that her usual calmness and composure had long disappeared. Instead, it was replaced by a heart that was burning with raging flames. After about 2 to 3 minutes of silence, she took a deep breath and asked, "Who are you? What do you want me to do?" "Who I am isn't important. What's important is that I happen to have a good script in my hands. I hope that you can play a very important role in it. Of course, in return, I will satisfy your desire and find a final home for your empty and lonely soul. Gods are the sustenance and home of the human spirit. Often, the emptier a person is, the more they desire it. Your unfortunate childhood has determined that you are a person who needs the support of faith. Therefore, nothing can make you feel happier than awakening a god of darkness." Zhang Cheng casually stated the ironclad truth. Because they are poor, they desire wealth. Because they are lowly, they desire power. Because they are weak, they desire power. Because they are empty, they desire faith. Often, the more a mortal lacks something, the more they desire it. This was an unchanging law since ancient times. It had nothing to do with a person's intelligence or education. Chapter 11:16. Zhang Cheng, who always liked to set conditions according to everyone's desires, had almost never been rejected, and this time was no exception. After a series of internal struggles and hesitations, the woman was unable to escape the fate of being a pawn. She signed a series of unequal treaties and finally came to the room where the sacred sword was. As soon as she stepped over the threshold, she saw a weapon emitting a sacred aura stuck in a huge rock. "This is the sacred sword." She carefully approached the sword and then used her gloved right hand to grab the hilt, trying to pull it out of the rock. However, the moment he began to exert force, the golden radiance on the surface of the sword, which was as bright as the sun, suddenly faded away. Following that, a cold and gloomy energy continuously emerged, causing the weapon to go from one extreme to another. The next second, boom, the dark energy announced its arrival in the most violent way. The hard rock was directly torn into tiny particles that could not be seen by the naked eye and scattered around like dust. The woman, who originally thought that even if she did not die, she would be seriously injured, suddenly found that not only was she unharmed, but there was a mysterious energy continuously flowing into her body. In less than a minute, she found that all the attributes of her body, including the upper limit of her magic power, were rapidly increasing. Powerful, indescribable power. Only by tightly grasping the hilt could she feel why this weapon was qualified to be called a sacred sword. Because the person who held it, without exception, would obtain unimaginable power. Even an old man lying on the bed on the verge of death would instantly have the power to kill a giant dragon with his bare hands. What was more interesting was that although this weapon had the name of a sacred sword, it did not have to be a sword. Instead, it could change its shape according to the will of the owner. It could be a dagger, a staff, a shield, a helmet, a wrist guard. In short, as long as there was a clear shape in one's mind, it could be perfectly replicated. However, the woman didn't change the holy sword's shape because she liked the sword's current appearance, especially the runes that flickered with a faint light. Every one of them was so mysterious, as if there were secrets and knowledge hidden behind them that no one knew. Unbelievable. This is really unbelievable. I can't even imagine what kind of person could forge such a powerful weapon. A god? Or the races that have disappeared in the long river of history? The woman stroked the blade affectionately as she spoke to herself emotionally. Even now, there were still many mysteries in her mind that she did not understand, but the moment she held the sacred sword, all of this was no longer important. After all, the power of this weapon was so great that it was worth it no matter how heavy the price was. However, after she calmed down, she realized that it wasn't safe here. So, she didn't say anything and went straight to the only exit that led to the surface. In particular, Zhang Cheng, who had never revealed his identity, made her feel an indescribable fear. Through the magic mirror, Zhang Cheng watched the woman return to the surface in a hurry, planning to cross the wasteland and return to the civilized world. He suddenly put on a playful smile and asked without looking back, "How far do you think she can go? Do you mean to awaken the god of darkness?" Yu Yu asked in an uncertain tone. "No, I'm talking about how far she can go in her search for her true desires. You have to understand that the emptiness in the hearts of some special individuals can't be filled by faith in gods alone. When this intense thirst can't be satisfied, guess what will happen?" Zhang Cheng pursed his lips and revealed a playful smile. He had been thirsty before, and he knew how intense and urgent the desire was. Fortunately, he eventually escaped from the dependence of mortals on desire. Otherwise, who knew what would have happened? Now, he had met a target that was extremely similar to himself. Naturally, he wanted to find out the truth. Of course, compared to those old masters who preferred to directly cross time and dimensions to find the answer, Zhang Cheng undoubtedly enjoyed the process of observation and research more. Perhaps as he grew older, he would lose his curiosity one day and no longer be passionate about research, but it was definitely not now. "Sorry, Master, I don't know. To the undead, existence itself is a mistake. Our bodies and lives are connected to negative energy, forming a huge black hole in the material world. We rely on our hatred for living things to maintain our lives. We don't feel much desire, but we can feel the curse of the entire world on us." The Spectre was obviously not good at analyzing such a complicated problem and directly used himself as an obscure analogy. To a certain extent, an intense desire that could never be satisfied was actually not much different from a curse. The only difference was that desire was a strong instinctive impulse, while a curse was the malice of the entire world. Yes, you're a cursed life form. If a planet's vitality is exuberant, you will feel stronger malice. But she is different. She can bring about changes to this world that no one can predict, especially when the god of darkness doesn't meet her expectations. Believe me, the scene will be very exciting. After saying that, Zhang Cheng pursed his lips and revealed an expression of anticipation, as if he could already see the future. Unfortunately, the Spectre obviously couldn't understand such expectations. He continued to ask in an emotionless tone, "Since this ruin has completed its mission, should we destroy it or seal it up?" Zhang Cheng waved his hand without thinking. "No, there's no need for that. I remember that there should be a lot of gold and silver treasures and magic items in the labyrinth, right? You can accompany those adventurers to have fun, and, at the same time, help me find a few chess pieces with potential. Maybe they will be useful in the future." "Useful? Do you mean these lowly mortals? I really can't think of how they can help your grand plan." The Spectre didn't hide his contempt for the adventurers. After all, the situation he observed these days was enough for him to disdain this group of small groups full of chaos and fighting. They had neither great power nor lofty goals. They were just hyenas chasing after power, wealth, and fame. Such guys were always the best candidates for cannon fodder. They had no value at all as chess pieces, let alone useful chess pieces. Don't be so mean. You have to understand that sometimes small people can also play an unexpected role. So never underestimate ants. As long as the time is right, small ants can also overturn a giant. Chapter 11:17. When the woman returned to the civilized world with the powerful holy sword, a welcoming ceremony was being held in the capital of the Anoya Kingdom. To be more precise, it was a welcoming banquet held by the Queen of Villia to welcome the envoy sent by Emperor Harrison. Although the military power in her hands was enough to destroy the other party's old-fashioned army on the battlefield, there were many times when political problems could not be solved by violence. She could not abandon traditional morals and values, so she could not bring herself to use cruel massacres to make the people in the occupied areas learn to respect and obey the new ruler. "Good evening, Your Majesty. On behalf of my father, I offer you the most sincere greetings." Before he left, he specifically told me that I must show enough respect. This was because pulling a kingdom back from the brink of destruction wasn't something any random monarch could do. He admires your courage and boldness very much, and he admires your method of risking everything at the critical moment. A very young and handsome man bowed at the waist. As a prince, especially the son of Emperor Harrison, he had received all kinds of court education since he was very young. Therefore, he was impeccable in terms of etiquette and behavior. Looking at the admiring and infatuated eyes of the noble women around him, one could see how popular he was with the opposite sex. Unfortunately, this so-called charm, demeanor, and temperament did not affect the young queen at all. Vilya only responded with a reserved smile. "Thank you for the greetings. I am very surprised and honored to be praised by the great Lion of Orlos. But I believe he didn't send you here just to say these words of praise, right?" "No, of course not. But don't you think it's a bit of a spoil sport? How about I invite you for a dance?" The prince extended his right hand and invited. His suggestive flirtation had no doubt attracted the attention of Isolde. However, the old man had no intention of stopping her. Instead, he observed Vilya's reaction with great interest, as if he was trying to figure out if the queen, who was growing rapidly, would be blinded by the so-called magic of love like all the other women. It must be known that women were always more emotional than rational. No matter how smart a woman was, once she fell in love, she would be like a moth to a flame. She would not listen to anyone's advice until she lost everything. "Dance?" Vilya raised his eyebrows slightly with a half-smile on his face. If it was in the past, when she was still a princess, she would definitely accept the other party's invitation. She would even have some intimate contact with him during the dance. Then, she would secretly investigate the background of the prince in front of her and consider him as one of her future marriage partners. After all, in this world of feudalism, princesses were tools to achieve certain political goals, so the choice of marriage partners was limited. Any princess with the slightest bit of intelligence would try to find a few good targets as soon as possible before she reached adulthood. There were various balls, banquets, and salons. In fact, rather than calling them ordinary social gatherings, it was better to call them a different kind of matchmaking convention. However, ever since he ascended to the throne, the situation in Vilya had become somewhat complicated. On the one hand, she was still an unmarried young woman and urgently needed a legal husband to help her remaining heirs to stabilize the turbulent hearts of the people. On the other hand, as a queen, her marriage could not be decided casually, and she could not marry whoever she liked. Instead, she had to weigh the gains and losses from the perspective of politics and power. In particular, marrying a foreign prince was a taboo among taboos. This was because it could easily cause the kingdom, which was already full of conflicts, to fall into chaos and even attract the interference of external forces. Vilya undoubtedly understood this point, and she believed that the other party understood it as well. This also meant that this seemingly gentle and refined prince was actually bait, a fatal trap to lure her into an abyss of no return. That's right, dance. For the long-standing friendship between our two kingdoms, as well as my personal admiration for your beauty and wisdom. The prince deliberately pretended not to see the angry gazes of the male nobles around him and continued to politely raise his arm. Unfortunately, Vilya did not have any intention of holding his arm. She smiled and refused. "Sorry, I don't feel like dancing yet. At least not before you tell me why you're here. Also, I feel that I need to warn you not to try any tricks in my court. Otherwise, even if you're the son of Orlos, I'll make you pay the price. Do you understand?" When the prince heard this, his face immediately turned ugly. He tried his best not to let his embarrassment turn into anger, and nodded lightly. "Understood. Please rest assured." "Very good. Now, then, please enjoy the banquet. I'm sure those noble women and young ladies will definitely let you have a wonderful night." After saying this sarcastic remark, Vilya smiled and returned to his seat. His eyes were full of disdain. After sitting down and taking a sip of cold wine, she asked without turning her head, "What is that Emperor Harrison trying to do? Don't tell me he's trying to seduce me. That would be too embarrassing." "No, of course not. This prince is just a cover. What he really wants to do is to use this diplomatic group to send a few needed talents to the nobles who are preparing to start a rebellion. This way, these fools can be effectively organized and used to create more trouble for you. Isolde explained casually. Rebellion. Those fellows finally can't take it anymore. Villia subconsciously clenched her fists, flames of anger flashing in her eyes. For this civil war that was about to break out, she had made sufficient preparations and arrangements. She intended to uproot these stubborn nobles who resisted her reforms in preparation for the coming centralization of power. The more participants and the larger the scale of the rebellion, the more advantageous it would be for the entire country. As for how many families would be wiped out in this rebellion, that was none of her business. After all, eliminating internal threats had always been something that Villia wanted to do, but she did not dare to do so. She was afraid that she would accidentally trigger a collective backlash from the nobles. But now, the nobles were divided into two factions, and the most powerful one chose to remain neutral. This was the best time to make a move. Wonderful Bookhouse. Chapter 11:18. In the middle of the night, the banquet in the palace had just ended. The entire group of envoys was led back to their residence by the prince. Before he could sit down to catch his breath, a servant walked in with two mysterious people covered in cloaks. He said carefully, "Your Highness, your friends are here." "Oh, my friend?" The prince's face revealed a surprised expression. He didn't have many friends in the kingdom. The only one he could call a friend was, "It's me, your Highness." One of the men took off his hood. It was the noble who had instigated the rebellion not too long ago. But now, he had lost his territory and title. In principle, he was no different from a commoner. But the complicated network of relationships that still existed could be preserved for a while. "Ah, so it's you. I heard my father mention you before. He said you were a true noble, a hero who was willing to stand up against tyranny and injustice." After figuring out the other party's identity, the prince immediately changed his expression and stood up to praise him loudly. Of course, in his heart, he was full of contempt for this despicable person who betrayed his own country for power. After all, those who betrayed their country in exchange for glory and wealth were scumbags, no matter what era they were in. Some would even be nailed to the pillar of shame in history forever. Even if they sincerely joined the other party, they would not be put in an important position. The prince's political skills were good. He hid this contempt deep in his heart and didn't show it. On the contrary, he showed the enthusiasm a prince should have for someone who joined him. To be able to hear Emperor Harrison's praise really makes me feel incomparable joy and fear. Please don't worry, I won't betray his trust and kick that damned usurper off the throne. The noble gave a solemn promise. Hearing this, the prince immediately nodded. "I admire your confidence and courage. But can you tell me about your plan?" "No problem. This is also the reason why I came to see you." As he spoke, the noble turned to the side and pointed at his companions behind him. "This is Baron Mallet, a veteran noble with outstanding military achievements. Next, he will explain to you what route we will take after we raise the banner of righteousness." The guy called Baron Mallet did not say anything else. He took out a map from his bosom and spread it out on the table. "Your Highness, please take a look. This is Tilgsburg, and this is the Clearwater River. If we can capture the docks and block the river within 3 days, we can cut off 2/3 of the capital's food supply. Think about it. When the civilians don't get enough food, how angry will they become? Interesting. You want to use food to force Villia to compromise?" The prince's eyes lit up slightly. It must be known that on this extremely backward transportation planet, any large city with a population of more than 100,000 was either close to the sea, where the transportation of most of the necessities of life was handled by sea, or there was a wide river, where the transportation was completed by river, or a combination of both. Otherwise, it was impossible to support so many people who were not engaged in agricultural activities. Since the most important food production areas of the kingdom were on both sides of the Clearwater River, the daily consumption of food, vegetables, meat, eggs, cheese, and so on was transported by the river to the docks, and then from the docks to the various markets to be sold. If the docks near Tilsburg were blocked, within a week, this densely populated city would fall into famine. At that time, as long as the ruler's intelligence was online, they would choose to compromise rather than take the huge risk of being ousted by the angry people. That's right. To be honest, from a military point of view, I really can't think of any way to win a direct battle. So at this time, strategy will be especially important. We don't need to win a battle. What we need is to give her a fatal blow when she least expects it. Since she wants to curry favor with the lowly people now, we'll let her see how these lowly people resist her rule. Baron Murray grinned, revealing an extremely sinister smile. It was obvious that he wanted to teach Vilya a lesson, to let this young girl understand what the foundation of the kingdom was worth relying on. Those lowly people who could be bought with a little kindness were not worth relying on at all. The slightest movement would cause these people to betray without hesitation. Ha ha! Looks like our queen is in trouble this time. But I have another question. Have you contacted the old king? Will he finally stand up and support us and give this coup a legitimate name? After all, my father is an emperor who likes to uphold orthodoxy. He doesn't want the glory that he has upheld all his life to be tarnished in his old age. The prince laughed and probed. In the so-called politics, a knight had to be both a whore and a monument to his chastity. If a knight was just a whore without a monument to his chastity, he would be looked down upon by others. He would be seen as a nouveau riche who lacked a foundation. If a knight was just a whore without a monument to his chastity, he would be a complete political idiot. He would be mocked by everyone for being pedantic, inflexible, and lacking in political skills. Only by being able to balance both would a qualified politician have the qualities. Baron Murray and the palace nobles exchanged glances and quickly responded, "For the sake of confidentiality, we haven't contacted the old king yet. But I believe that when he sees the changes in the situation, he won't reject our proposal. No matter what, he has to be responsible for his family. Otherwise, the kingdom can change to another family to be the royal family, right? Who do you plan to change to?" The prince keenly grasped the key words, and an expression of interest appeared on his face. "Of course it's you, your highness. Don't you think that the great Emperor Harrison's son marrying the kingdom's princess and then officially becoming the king and ruling the kingdom is a perfect plan?" The palace nobles hinted meaningfully. Hearing this, the prince suddenly felt a flame of ambition ignite in the depths of his heart, emitting unimaginable energy. He didn't dare to imagine what it would be like if he could rule the kingdom as a king and help his son ascend to the throne, especially when he was far away from his father, who was obsessed with power. Everything would be decided by him. To him, it was simply a naked temptation. Chapter 11:19. So, the prince is plotting against me? Vilya held the report that her spy had just sent to her and pursed her lips into a sarcastic smile. At this moment, she was lying on the bed in her bedroom, wearing a thin nightgown. One of her hands was supporting her chin, giving off a hazy sense of beauty that was full of wisdom. However, her eyes were as sharp as a dagger that had just been unsheathed. There was no doubt that the prince's greedy ambition and desire had angered this young queen. Ever since she had made up her mind to control her own fate, this was the first time she had met someone who wanted to turn her into a toy and puppet. "Yes, your majesty. They are also planning to take over Tilsburg and cut off the transportation of food through the river, causing the entire capital to fall into famine. Then they will incite the starving people to overthrow your rule." The spy lowered his head and reported without any embellishment. The few people who had been plotting together not long ago would never have dreamed that their every move was actually being watched by spies everywhere. In less than half an hour, the contents of all their conversations and discussions had been presented to another person involved. For a queen who had come to power through a coup, Vilya undoubtedly attached great importance to the development of the intelligence agency. Apart from the royal intelligence system that she had taken over from her father who had retired, she had also secretly set up a shadow agency that no one knew about. This shadow agency was responsible for monitoring and cleaning up the royal intelligence system to ensure that there were no people who secretly opposed her. After a few months of intensive training, it was now time to reap the rewards. Including the noble families who were secretly plotting to start a rebellion, almost all of them had one or two spies who constantly passed on important information back to her. Therefore, no matter how many rumors there were in the outside world, she had never panicked because every move of the enemy was within her control. But now, this prince who had come from afar had made a mistake, a fatal mistake that was enough to prevent him from ever returning to his own country. Instead, he would become a prisoner, a pawn and tool used to humiliate Emperor Harrison. I didn't realize that there were so many smart people who knew how to think among these traitors. Unfortunately, they are all wrong. I will not passively wait for them to start a rebellion. I will strike first to gain the upper hand. As she spoke, Vilya quickly picked up a piece of paper from the table and wrote down a series of orders on it. Then, she stamped it with the royal seal. Here, send it to my generals as soon as possible. At the same time, keep a close eye on that prince to prevent him from escaping. As you wish, Your Majesty. The spy kept his head down as he received the letter. He didn't dare to look at the queen's nightgown, which was full of hazy beauty. He was very clear that in this line of work, the most important thing was to know restraint. He must not cross the red line, otherwise, what awaited him would be a merciless purge. At the same time, hundreds of kilometers away in a city controlled by Kerwin, the woman who had returned to the civilized world with the holy sword was now sitting in an inconspicuous corner of a tavern, sipping hard liquor while coldly observing everything around her. Ever since she made up her mind to awaken the god of darkness, she had been thinking about how to establish a stable belief system so that more people could understand the greatness of darkness. Unfortunately, even though many people acted according to the rules of darkness, they still yearned for the light in their hearts. This also meant that no matter how many benefits the darkness gave them, it couldn't keep their hearts. In order to understand the essence of human nature, she didn't rush to recruit believers and establish a church. Instead, she stayed in this place, patiently observing all kinds of people. What did they desire? What were they willing to pay? And what kind of attitude they had towards their beliefs? Just as she began to become interested in the two boys begging in the corner, a man with tattoos on his head and half of his face walked over and sat across the table. He said in a slightly teasing voice, "Hey, babe, you've been here for almost a week, haven't you? How about it? Do you want to do some physical and mental exercises with me? I promise, as long as you nod your head, no one will disturb you no matter what you do in this tavern." "Oh, you seem to be very confident." The woman didn't get angry at the man's blatant teasing. Instead, she lazily picked up the glass and took a sip of wine. Of course I'm confident. You can ask other people, who am I, Grizzly Raw Man, and how many guys have I dealt with who wanted to cause trouble? The man raised his thick arms, showing off his well-developed chest and biceps. Needless to say, he was the thug in charge of this tavern, like a thug or a minder. He was just a little bit better than those low-class thugs. He had his own territory, and he didn't need to spend money to drink, eat, and rent a room to sleep here. On the contrary, the bar owner would give him some money every week to ensure that his tavern wouldn't be targeted by other hooligans and thugs, and that there wouldn't be any fights between drunkards that would kill people. Even Nightingale was willing to provide some special services for free to ensure that when he was in trouble or danger, the other party would help him. Of course, as a bodyguard and thug, his position wasn't lifelong, and he wasn't protected by any law. As long as there was a stronger guy from the outside who defeated him, then he could naturally replace him. In short, this was a guy who relied on his fists, body, and strength to make a living. His brain was filled with violence, tobacco, alcohol, and women. The only enjoyment in life was to have fun. So when he saw a young and beautiful woman appear, he would immediately go up to see if he could take advantage of her for free. "Hee, you're really cute. Since it's like this, then I'll give you a chance. Come, follow me if you have the guts." The woman stood up with a meaningful smile and slowly walked up the wooden stairs to the second floor. At the corner, she didn't forget to turn around and leave a suggestive smile. Oh, the only thing I don't lack is courage. Come on, guys, cheer for me. Tonight, I'm going to have a wonderful night." The man raised his hands and made a stupid and crude gorilla-like action, and didn't forget to make strange sounds. This poor guy didn't know what kind of terrible things he was about to face. The drunkards around also didn't know anything and noisily followed along. There were even two drunkards who wanted to join in. After all, it was better to have fun alone than to have fun together, and the more people, the more exciting it would be. But without exception, they were all kicked away by the man and finally rushed into the only unlocked room on the second floor alone. Chapter 11:20. Hee, baby, I'm coming. Just like all male creatures dominated by primitive desires, this man had completely lost his mind. As soon as he rushed into the room, he impatiently began to take off his clothes. But before he finished taking off his shirt, the woman, standing in front of the window, suddenly turned around. With a faint smile on her face, she asked in an incomparably strange tone, "Do you have faith?" Faith? What the hell is that? The man was baffled by this brainless question. He even forgot what he should do next and was stunned on the spot. Faith, as the name suggests, is something that you desire the most in your heart but can never obtain. It's a kind of spiritual sustenance and comfort. It's a kind of precious wealth that can fill your heart when you feel empty and lonely. The woman looked up at the starry sky and explained. She didn't know why, but ever since she learned that there was a sleeping God in this world waiting for her to wake him up, she felt an inexplicable excitement. It was different from accepting missions from the dark believers and doing some crazy things. It was as if something had filled up her originally empty soul. It was due to this that she signed a series of unequal contracts and became a true believer of darkness, or rather, an apostle of darkness. But unfortunately, this simple-minded and muscular man couldn't understand these overly complicated things. To be exact, he might not even be able to calculate the addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division of more than 2 digits correctly. He shook his head with a dumbfounded expression. Damn it, I don't understand what you're talking about, and I don't need to understand. Now, hurry up and take off your clothes. What nonsense spiritual communication. I prefer the purest and most pleasurable physical communication. As soon as his voice fell, he stretched out his arm, wanting to drag the woman into his embrace and tear off her clothes to vent the most primitive and instinctive desire in his heart. Normally, a burly man who was more than 9 meters tall and weighed about 100 kilograms should be able to do whatever he wanted to a thin woman who was only 7 meters tall and weighed less than 60 kilograms. But interestingly, the situation today was exactly the opposite. The moment the man's rough hand grabbed the woman's arm, he suddenly felt a huge force throwing him up. He somersaulted in the air and fell hard on the floor with a muffled thud. Bang! The violent impact made him scream uncontrollably. There was no other way. One had to know that this was the cheapest tavern and inn. The floor had not been repaired for who knows how many years. Many parts of the floor were curled up, so naturally it would not be good to fall down. Just as he was struggling to get up, the woman raised her foot and stomped on him. Bang! The pitiful man felt as if he had been stepped on by an elephant. Blood spurted out of his mouth, and the burning sensation caused by the concussion in his lungs was like a burning flame. It was simply worse than death. Answer my question. Do you have any faith? The woman bent down and stared into his eyes. I do. I have faith. The man hurriedly nodded. He finally realized that he was in big trouble. The woman in front of him was not a prostitute, but a mad woman with terrifying strength. Very good. So tell me, what do you believe in? Violence? Pleasure? Or is it to satisfy your own baser desires? The woman continued to ask. I'm not too sure. I just like the feeling of stepping on others under my foot. I desire the people around me to fear, flatter, and please me. The man spoke his truest thoughts without hesitation. After all, how could a gangster like him, who lived at the bottom of society, have any lofty goals or ambitions? He only hoped to keep his position for a few more years and enjoy the benefits brought by his fists to his heart's content. When he was defeated by an outsider one day, he would take the remaining money to buy a piece of land in the countryside and marry a village woman as his wife. Then, he would have a few more children and live the rest of his life in peace. When the woman heard this, a satisfied expression immediately appeared on her face. So, No matter if it's your desires or your preferences, they are more inclined towards darkness. Now, if I want you to swear to offer your faith to a god of darkness, are you willing? Yes, I'm willing, as long as you don't kill me. I'm willing to do anything. The man did not realize that he was agreeing to something so dangerous. He only wanted to get out of this dangerous situation as soon as possible. He was not sure if he would die mysteriously if he said no and become a cold corpse. He would not be discovered until his corpse began to rot and smell. If that's the case, then please recite after me. The great God of darkness, Law. The great God of darkness, Law. I am willing to offer my faith and soul to you. I am willing to offer my faith and soul to you. I am willing to become your believer and spread the seeds of faith for you until the day you awaken from the darkness and bring true salvation to this world. Following one declaration after another, the man was shocked to discover that a ray of black light had descended from the sky and shone on top of his head. Gradually, a cold and dark energy began to merge into his body, continuously strengthening his muscles, blood vessels, and internal organs. When everything was over, he was shocked to discover that his strength was actually several times greater than usual. It was as if he could flip over a horse carriage that was charging toward him with his bare hands. It seems that the God of darkness has acknowledged you and bestowed upon you the blessing of darkness. Remember, from now on, you're no longer an ordinary gangster. You are a warrior who has been blessed by darkness and must fight for the God of darkness, Law. Otherwise, the food of darkness will devour your body and soul. A chilling smile appeared on the woman's face. There was no doubt that this was an attempt to summon him, mixed with threats and promises. Fear accounted for most of it. No matter what, the biggest difference between darkness and light was that the latter could only rely on one's own subjective will, while the former could achieve its goals through many despicable means. Therefore, regardless of whether it was out of sincerity or out of helplessness, the power of darkness had acknowledged him. What I need to do. The man was obviously not completely stupid and quickly understood his situation. In front of the massive power of darkness, he was like a pitiful little shrimp that did not have the slightest ability to resist. Instead of fighting with all his might, it was better to obediently choose to obey. He might even be able to obtain more benefits and break away from his precarious life and become a person above all others. Wonderful Bookhouse. Chapter 1121. How could a religion spread so quickly in such a short period of time? The answer was simple. It was nothing more than deception, coercion, and bribery. The former was easy to understand. It was just making up some stories, such as how powerful the God of the church was, how many great things he had done, and how he had even sacrificed himself to save all of humanity. As for the latter, naturally, it was to first scare you and tell you how serious the consequences would be if you didn't believe in God. Then, it was followed by telling you that if you change your faith now, not only would you be absolved of your previous sins, you could also go to another world to enjoy a better life after death. Through giving promises of the future, even after death, in exchange for the faith of mortals. This was a common characteristic of almost all religions. The only difference was that religions that served true God were not too greedy in material matters, while religions of false gods would, without exception, become tools to amass wealth and interfere with worldly power. Relying on grizzly bear romance familiarity with the low-level gangs, the woman quickly incorporated a group of bastards who committed all kinds of crimes and then used them to spread her faith. Of course, this faith was actually similar to collecting protection fees. In the slums where the official power couldn't reach, those who were willing to believe in the God of darkness, Lua, and regularly participate in the worship activities could be exempted from most of the protection fees, and those who weren't willing to believe would be cruelly ripped off. Didn't it sound familiar? It was exactly the same method used by a religion in the Middle East on Earth in the process of rapid expansion. That's right. For mortals, it didn't matter at all what kind of god they believed in, especially when they couldn't even solve the most basic problem of food and clothing. Why would they care about the teachings of the gods? As long as they could obtain tangible benefits, even if they had to worship the devil, it didn't matter. Looking at the poor people kneeling on the ground and muttering, the woman couldn't help but slightly raise the corner of her mouth and said in a voice that only she could hear, "So that's how it is? This is faith. It's much simpler than I thought." Although they are far from being devout and can't understand the true meaning of darkness, they can provide power to awaken the god of darkness from chaos. I don't understand. What's the point of doing this? They're a bunch of poor people. Even if you throw them into a pot and squeeze them for oil, you can't squeeze any out of them. Rahman shook his head with a blank expression. Especially these days, this dangerous and crazy woman in front of him had taken out thousands of gold coins from her own pocket as fun for activities. Could there really be a so-called god of darkness? Although there were all kinds of temples and churches in this land, no one had actually seen God. Even the miracles recorded in the ancient books were mostly coincidences and accidents. The reason why the upper-class nobles believed in God was, on the one hand, to seek peace of mind. On the other hand, they hoped to use these large and small churches to restrain their thoughts and prevent the serfs and tenants who had been oppressed for a long time from rebelling. Other people aside, Rahman, who had done a lot of evil things, definitely did not believe that there were gods in this world. Otherwise, he would have been struck to death by lightning long ago. With your brain that's not much smarter than a pig's, of course you can't understand how terrifying the power of faith is. Think about it. If more than half of this city's lower-class citizens become members of the church, and then a few military officers or nobles also join, as the owner of this city, how would you react? The woman asked with a cold smile. You mean, corrode this city bit by bit from the lower class, and finally achieve the goal of obtaining power? Although Rahman did not receive any education, he was not stupid and immediately understood the other party's unspoken words. Obtaining power? The woman laughed disdainfully. No, I'm not interested in power. What I want is the right to openly spread my faith and not sneakily like now. Do you know? When a religion's cohesion reaches a certain level, the power it can unleash is far beyond your imagination. At that time, even if the king sees us, he will have to lower his noble head and beg me to put the crown on his head. Faith is something that surpasses all worldly power. Crown the king. Rahman's eyes widened, as if he did not dare to imagine such a crazy scene. That's right. One day, I will build a heaven on earth and let everyone kneel in front of the god of darkness, Lua. Even the king is no exception. When saying this, the woman's eyes flashed with a fiery flame that could burn everything. There was no doubt that this work in progress had filled her spiritual emptiness and even gave her an incomparable sense of satisfaction. Although she did not know how long this passion would last, at least for now, she had no intention of backing down. Just as the god of darkness was silently spreading the news among the lower class, Kerwin finally received the information from his allies. He sat in his study and rubbed his chin, deep in thought. Born as a noble in the countryside, he had the same problem as most nobles, and that was that he looked down on the people living at the bottom of society. He did not care what they did on a daily basis, as long as they paid their taxes on time. It had to be said that this rough management gave the people with the intention too much room for manipulation. However, until now, the natives of this world had not realized that once the bottom of their pyramid structure collapsed and rebounded, it would cause a terrifying chain reaction. So, that prince has taken a liking to Vilya and wants to use this rebellion to force her to hand over her power and become a puppet for him to toy with. Kerwin casually threw the information into the brazier and burned it, his tone revealing undisguised sarcasm. He really did not know if he should scold the other party for being stupid or laugh at the other party for being overconfident. After all, Vilya was the agent chosen by the master. The steel puppets and monster army in her hands alone were enough to wipe out more than 90% of the countries on this continent. But now, there was someone ambitious who wanted to replace the master before coming into contact with her. That was a forbidden area that even he did not dare to touch. Yes, sir. If I'm not mistaken, the moment this letter was handed to you, the rebellion had already begun. How about it? Should we give them a hand? A trusted aide probed cautiously. No. This matter has nothing to do with us. Besides, I don't want to participate in this kind of conspiracy that is destined to fail." As he spoke, Kerwin picked up a pen and paper, quickly wrote a passionate letter on it, and handed it to his confidant. "Go, hand this letter to Vilya. Tell her that we should put aside our prejudices and hatred, work together, and teach that arrogant old man a lesson." Chapter 1122. Interesting. Kerwin actually wants to put aside his previous enmity and work with me. When she received the letter, a rare look of surprise appeared on Vilya's face. She could not believe that the tyrant who had once coveted her beauty and desired her could actually judge the situation and find an opportunity to profit from the complicated situation. Especially after the news of Kerwin's engagement with that princess had spread, he already had an excuse to legally take over more land. To be precise, if anything happened to that old Emperor Harrison, the huge territory he had conquered would immediately collapse, and he would fall into an internal power struggle. Countless ambitious princes and princesses would use this opportunity to rope in outside forces and even collude with foreign forces. Even if they had to betray their own country's interests, they would still want to ascend to the throne first. As the saying went, one would not feel bad if a child sold his father's land. They had not experienced that dark era before the dawn, so they did not understand what kind of humiliation their father had endured to finally become the most outstanding monarch in hundreds of years. In the eyes of these princes and princesses, their father was a cold machine, a cold-blooded animal who was willing to do anything for power. There was no kinship at all. Since they treated their father like this, they naturally did not have any good feelings about the huge territory he had conquered. A very small number of people were filled with hatred, and even wanted to destroy the entire country with their own hands, just to let their father feel pain and despair before he died. It had to be said that as a monarch, Harrison's life was successful, but as a father, he was an extreme failure. Appreciating the humble attitude revealed in the letter, Vilya finally couldn't help but laugh out loud. While laughing, he didn't forget to tease, "Since he's so sincere, let's work together for once. But this time, I have to be the one leading." Haha, Kerwin will probably go crazy when he hears this. Isolde had also walked in from outside, and his tone was filled with undisguised schadenfreude. No one liked to yell at a tyrant, especially a tyrant who thought he was infallible. Now, the tyrant had fallen from his high and mighty position, and even had to use a slightly pleading tone to write a letter to his enemy. Just thinking about it was amusing. Vilya looked up and asked with interest, "What do you think he'll do?" "It's simple. An assassin who is proficient in stealth, and a bottle of poison that could knock people unconscious." "You don't understand. Harrison's prestige is so high that none of his sons or daughters can gain the recognition of all the vassals. In addition, he had deliberately let his children fight with each other over the years so that he could choose the most outstanding successor, which directly led to a large number of supporters who were slightly capable. They either had power, money, or military power. Perhaps there won't be any major crisis when Harrison is alive and conscious, but if he loses consciousness, a war will quickly sweep across half of the continent," Isolde said with a playful expression. The fall of a political powerhouse was bound to be accompanied by violent social upheaval, even triggering a large-scale war. This was already common knowledge, especially in a feudal system that relied on personal charm and prestige to control power. If a powerful king suddenly died, his heirs would definitely kill each other for the throne until the final victor was decided, or the country would be divided and destroyed under the interference of external forces. Isolde had read many books on politics and history, so he was very clear about the weakness of the so-called Lion of Orlos. Unfortunately, most people were convinced by the powerful great emperor's methods and neglected the fact that he was just a mortal. Mortals had weaknesses, and they were fatal weaknesses. So, Kerwin will send out an assassin to achieve his unspeakable goal through poisoning? Vilya narrowed her eyes, as if she was scheming something. However, Isolde shook his head with a smile. "Forget it. Don't waste your energy. If you want to catch him red-handed, it's impossible. People like him will never leave any clues once they decide to use underhanded means. Instead of wasting time on this, why don't we take the opportunity to get in touch with his fiancée? Fiancée? Vilya obviously realized something, and her eyes lit up. Yes, as far as I know, this young and beautiful princess seems to be full of complaints about marrying an old and ugly tyrant. If we can reach a series of agreements with her first, then we can reap the most benefits from this chaos and ruin Kerwin's plan, Isolde suggested straightforwardly. That's a good idea. We should work together and let that traitor's efforts go to waste. After that, Vilya quickly gathered her most trusted subordinates and began to discuss the feasibility of the whole plan, as well as how they could make Kerwin suffer one last time. At the same time, far away on the top floor of the Mage Tower, Zhang Cheng had already noticed the conflict between his two war agents through the magic mirror. He couldn't help but smile and sigh. Competition and killing are the only ways for life to evolve. Look at these two pitiful creatures. Not long ago, one of them was just a small noble in the countryside, and the other was an ignorant princess who only knew how to flirt and enjoy the flattery of young men. But now, they're actually skillfully playing with schemes and tricks, all wanting to gain the upper hand in this battle. Master, are you sure you want to let them fool around like this? Islands frowned, his face filled with strong dissatisfaction. Why not? Zhang Cheng shrugged nonchalantly. Don't you think that in the process of competition, both of them have improved significantly? Remember, never let your subordinates live too comfortably. This will only breed laziness in them. At the same time, don't let them feel that they're the only and irreplaceable one. Otherwise, it won't be long before you have to kill them and replace them with a new one. Desire can never be satisfied. What you need to do is to learn to control it. Use intimidation, violence, and death to restrain the growth of desire. Islands nodded. So, your method is to create conflict and let the two subordinates fight in the same field to ensure that one can never be the only one. In theory, that's right, but it's still a little complicated to operate. For example, you have to balance the power between the two so that it's not too far apart. Especially when selecting people, you have to pay attention to the quality of their talents. Otherwise, the situation will soon be out of balance. Forget it, you'd better do it yourself. It won't take long for you to understand. Now, go out for me and monitor that woman's every move. As you wish. Chapter 11:23. Tildsburg was a military town located at an important river transportation hub within the kingdom. Initially, when the country was still expanding, its main purpose was to defend against invasions from the water. Later, as the country continued to expand, it gradually became a pure logistics transit station. The huge warehouse at the docks was stocked with a large amount of goods traded by merchants from the south to the north. In particular, the grain, vegetables, meat, and eggs shipped to the capital took several hours to load every day to satisfy the needs of the large number of city residents who did not engage in agricultural production. Therefore, if an army suddenly occupied this place, not only could they cut off the food supply of the most important city in the kingdom, they could also obtain at least half a year to a year's worth of free logistics. In addition, the castle was repaired every year, so it still maintained the strong defense unique to the original military fortress. Even if it was besieged by enemies more than 10 times their number, it could still hold firm. As the military commander who started the rebellion, Baron Mallet saw this point. So he took advantage of the night to launch a surprise attack and took down the few garrison soldiers in one fell swoop. Looking at the warehouse piled up like a mountain and the food and goods that were about to be sent to the capital, he could not help but curl the corners of his mouth slightly. He said in a mocking tone, "Without enough food, I'll see how you're going to deal with those starving peasants, my dear princess." Obviously, as the staunchest supporter of the conservatives, he had never acknowledged Vilya as his queen. He only acknowledged that she had the royal blood, which was the princess identity. How do you think she will react when she finds out that we have occupied this place? The palace nobles stood on the top floor of the tall castle, looking down at the merchants who were crying and shouting after their goods were confiscated. They did not show the slightest bit of sympathy. This was because most of these merchants were low-class traveling merchants who relied on selling low-profit daily necessities to earn the price difference. They did not have the support of powerful nobles, nor did they have any forces that they could not afford to offend. Therefore, almost every time a war broke out, the first unlucky ones were always these people. The lucky ones would at most lose their goods and a large sum of money, but the unlucky ones might even lose their lives. After all, weakness was the original sin. The weak were destined to be exploited and enslaved by the strong. No matter what era, what system, the essence would not change. The only thing that changed was the definition of exploitation and oppression. It was propaganda by the ruling class to eliminate the resistance of the people at the bottom to the greatest extent. As the saying goes, a lie repeated 1,000 times is the truth. From the moment you were born, you were surrounded by all kinds of explicit and implicit preaching of a set of theories. Then you would naturally accept it and even see it as the supreme truth. Even if someone put the truth in front of you, you would probably not be willing to believe it. The influence of preconceived notions was so great that after entering the information age, almost every country on Earth had strengthened their control over information dissemination. Many people believe that freedom of speech had never really existed. It didn't exist in the past, it didn't exist now, and it would never exist in the future. As long as there were classes in intelligent life, the gap between the rich and the poor, the unequal education received, and the difference in genes and intelligence, the exploitation and domination of the strong over the weak would always exist, even if the material civilization had developed to the point where it could be distributed according to needs. In fact, the people at the bottom never asked for equality or freedom of speech, but a way to change their social class. As long as the passage could accommodate 10 to 15% of the people at the bottom of society, then the whole society would present a positive environment full of hope and fighting spirit. But on the other hand, when too many talented people were firmly suppressed at the bottom, it wouldn't take long for a bottom-up rebellion to form. When a critical point was reached, this contradiction would suddenly erupt, and the transfer of power would be completed in the most violent and bloody way. If the original ruling class won, then the rebels would undoubtedly be cruelly purged. This purge would kill the talented people at the bottom, and they wouldn't have enough strength to launch the next rebellion in a short time. But if the rebels won, they would also launch a massacre of the existing vested interest groups, completely destroying the original political structure to make room for their own people. Then, they would become the new ruling class. As for the slogan of starting a rebellion to win the support of the people at the bottom, it was basically impossible to fulfill. In any case, no matter who won in the end, the weak would always be the weak. They would always be exploited and oppressed at the bottom. Unless one day, a very small number of them suddenly woke up and began to think from the perspective of the strong and learn the way the strong did things, then they might have a chance to change their fate. But unfortunately, most of the natives on this planet didn't have such an understanding. After most of the merchants were robbed, they didn't even dare to protest and chose to leave. After all, this was a country ruled by nobles. From the time they were sensible, they accepted the idea that nobles were born noble to rule the lowly commoners. Any form of resistance was a provocation to the traditional power and would lead to the most tragic suppression. Over time, they were used to the unscrupulous actions of the nobles, used to having to pay a toll every time they passed through the territory of a noble. However, these small merchants were not really stupid. After finding out in private why the army suddenly occupied Tilgsburg, they immediately took a ship and fled towards the direction of the kingdom's capital, intending to quickly inform the young queen of the news. Of course, this was all part of Bear Marais' plan. After watching the small merchants scramble to board the small boats and descend, he immediately ordered with a sneer, "Immediately fill the boats we captured with stones, and then sink them 40 kilometers downstream. Remember, at all costs, make sure that the warships docked at the port of the capital can't pass through." "Understood. I guarantee that even if Villia comes with her steel puppets, they will all be trapped in the bottomless black swamp." Another noble officer patted his chest with a smug smile on his face. 40 kilometers away from the port was a large swamp with lush aquatic plants. Not to mention the monsters lurking in it. Just the black sludge alone was enough to make the invading enemy suffer. Without the advantage of the waterway, it was almost impossible to bring a well-equipped army to Tilgsburg, and Baron Murray's strategy was very simple. It was to carry out a word: delay. Delay until the residents in the capital could no longer bear the hunger and riot. Then, his political and military goals would be achieved. Chapter 1124. Your Majesty, Your Majesty, this is bad. Those damn bastards. They actually gathered together to start a rebellion and took over Tilgsburg. According to the news from the merchants who escaped, almost all the food and necessities sent to the capital were forcibly seized. In less than half a day after the news came back, the price of all the food had doubled. At this rate, the entire city will fall into famine in less than 3 days. A bureaucrat who had been promoted from the bottom rushed into the palace in a panic, shouting breathlessly. He looked so nervous at this moment, as if the sky was falling and the end of the world had arrived. But it was no wonder. After all, he was born at the bottom of society and knew better than any other noble how terrible things would happen once famine struck. When that time came, driven by hunger and death, all the desperate civilians would revolt. They would either be killed by fully armed soldiers or rush into all the places where they thought there was food. In contrast, the nobles who were watching coldly from the sidelines were exceptionally calm, as if they did not care about this crisis at all. For the nobles who were temporarily neutral, regardless of whether this rebellion succeeded or not, they would be able to reap enough benefits from it. If they failed, they could devour the wealth and land that the rebellious families had accumulated for generations, or even dozens of generations, to complete an effortless expansion. But if they were lucky enough to succeed, they would be able to overthrow the queen who did not represent their interests on the throne and restore the beautiful era of the royal family and nobles. As for the deaths of the untouchables at the bottom of society, they were like rats. No matter how many of them died, they would increase rapidly as the situation stabilized. Looking at the ugly faces of these vassals, Villia kept sneering in her heart. After a long while, she deliberately pretended to be casual and asked, "Oh, rebellion? Didn't those fellows voluntarily give up their noble titles and territories and prepare to seek refuge with foreign monarchs? Could it be that they suddenly changed their minds? Your Majesty, according to the usual practice, the royal family should quickly send out an envoy to find out what happened." A noble stood up and suggested. It was obvious that he was trying to buy time for the rebels. "Envoy, a group of civilians attacked my land and tried to cut off the food supply to the capital of the kingdom. You actually wanted to send an envoy?" Villia's tone suddenly changed, and a sharp light shot out from her eyes. I'm so sorry. I forgot that they're no longer nobles." The man with the goatee was so scared that he trembled. He took the initiative to bow and hide his true intentions. Villia was not a fool. He knew that from the day he decided to centralize power, he was already on the opposite side of all the nobles. The people standing in the hall of the palace were not so much vassals as they were potential enemies and parasites that had to be cleaned up in the future. After understanding this point, she ordered without hesitation, immediately mobilize the army and take back Tilgsburg within 3 days. Remember, all the participants and their families will be charged with treason. The main culprit and the male heirs will all be hanged and all their assets confiscated. The female members will all be exiled. Bang! Your will is our command. The old man, standing on the right side of the hall, stepped forward and slapped his sturdy breastplate. As one of the few generals in the army who had slowly climbed up from the bottom, he knew very well that his queen needed a glorious victory to prove herself. At the same time, she also needed to show the enemies hiding in the dark that the kingdom was already a powerful kingdom. Therefore, there could not be any mistakes in this war. Not only could there not be any mistakes, but they also needed to win quickly and steadily. Only then could they intimidate everyone. Of course, after personally experiencing the destruction of the kingdom not long ago, he had full confidence in his own army. He did not think that a mere mob could withstand the crushing of the steel puppet army. He did not need many. As long as there was a battle on open ground, the low-level soldiers would scatter and flee due to the collapse of their morale. "Very good. Go, my general. Go, and bring back the leader of the rebels. I want to cut off their heads with my own hands and hang them on the city wall, so that every subject can see what happens to those who dare to provoke me." After that, Villiers stood up and pulled out his sword. As a symbol of military power, he handed it to the old man. The latter did not say anything. He strode forward and knelt on one knee, receiving the king's sword that was studded with gold, silver, and jewels with both hands. From the beginning to the end, the two of them did not pay any attention to the nobles with countless titles, including Duke Brunhilde, who had been the commander-in-chief of the three armies for a long time. Fortunately, the Duke was well-mannered. At least, he did not show any disdain or contempt on his face. Another Duke could not help but ask, "Your Majesty, are you sure you want a guy who has only commanded 2 battles to lead the army alone?" "That's right," the Duke said. "Are you sure you want a guy who has only commanded 2 battles to lead the army alone? Why, is there a problem? Or do you think that my army is not enough to destroy the rebels?" Villiers narrowed her eyes and asked with a smile. Her attitude was obviously angry. She was angry at the entire noble class. If it were not for the fact that she did not have enough people to manage the kingdom, she would definitely make these bastards who only cared about their family's interests go as far away as possible. "No, what I mean is that you should at least send a few nobles to accompany you. You should know that the best way is to disintegrate an alliance from the inside. You only need a few nobles to act as lobbyists and promise some benefits to those who are willing to change their ways. Then, you will be able to quell the rebellion at a minimal cost." The Duke could feel the disgust in the air, but he still explained calmly. He understood that this rebellion had made the young queen hostile to the entire noble class. But so what? Look at those commoners who were promoted from the bottom. How many of them could replace the nobles in important positions? So far, not a single one. That was right. This was the reality, the cruel reality. Even if the young queen knew it, there was nothing she could do. It was fine if she had resentment. She could find a time to vent it. Anyway, as she grew older, the impulsive young people would eventually become more mature. They would gradually realize the irreplaceable importance of the nobles and eventually reach some kind of cooperation agreement. Once this powerful queen died, everything would return to normal. Chapter 1125. Bastards. What are these damn bastards trying to do? Do they really think that I don't dare to do anything to them, so they have nothing to fear? As soon as the council was dismissed and she returned to her bedroom, Villiers could not help but vent her uncontrollable anger. However, she did have enough reason to be angry, especially those who claimed to be looking out for the interests of the kingdom, but in fact were constantly digging at the foundation of the country, trying to control power through bloodlines and a huge network of relationships, not giving the people of the lower class the slightest chance to rise. What was even more frightening was that in order to ensure that future generations would have the same hereditary rights as themselves, they did not hesitate to use a dignified pretense to exonerate those rebels who should have been executed. They tried to pardon some of them, just to prevent more and more rights from being concentrated. Sometimes, the young queen was a little envious of her enemies and competitors. At least Kerwin, who had established absolute authority through terror, violence, and slaughter, never had to worry about these internal conflicts. The reason was very simple. Those who dared to resist or secretly sabotage had long been chopped into pieces and fed to the dogs, along with their families. Under such naked violence and the threat of death, the administrative system of the tyrant subordinates maintained unimaginable integrity and efficiency. Of course, this did not mean that those who climbed up through military exploits were honest, but there were too many ways to obtain a large amount of wealth in a short period of time, such as killing the male heirs of the enemy, and then seizing their land, family property, and even the young and beautiful female members. In short, after tasting the sudden increase in wealth brought by plundering at almost zero cost, they no longer cared about the little benefits they gained through corruption and embezzlement. What's more, doing this might anger the increasingly temperamental tyrant. It was far better to wait for the next war and kill the enemy. Killing and plundering, to some extent, were like drugs. They would make people intoxicated and unable to extricate themselves. They knew that there was something wrong with doing this, but when it came to it, they they still could not control themselves. Isolde obviously understood Villia's feelings at the moment and calmly comforted her. "Calm down, child. This small matter is not worth your anger, and it is not worth losing your mind. Don't forget that no matter what those nobles want to do, they must first get your approval. At least in name, you are still their monarch, and this is irreplaceable in the eyes of the people." Irreplaceable? I'll bet on it. Those nobles must be trying to find a way to meet with my father alone. They hated me, and I hated them just as much. Perhaps the book was right. The backward way of relying on the nobles to ensure the stability of the country would sooner or later be swept into the trash heap of history. But for now, I can't do anything to them. Talents, I need more talents from the bottom. Villia clenched his fists tightly, gnashing his teeth as he spoke his true thoughts. As a member of the royal family, she naturally couldn't imitate Kerwin and slaughter all the nobles who resisted her, leaving only those who were scared out of their wits and only knew how to obey orders. Then she would promote some slightly capable people from the bottom to assist in managing the country. She would use threats and intimidation to ensure the efficiency and integrity of the administrative organization. This was because she knew that relying on terror and violence to maintain her rule would not last long. After at most a generation, following the death of the tyrant, there would be a tsunami-like backlash. She longed for her country to be able to survive for a long time, at least not to disappear after her death. The cultivation of talents is never something that can be done in a short period of time. I have already sent people to deal with it. Don't worry, you are still young and have plenty of time. Perhaps in 10, 20, or 30 years, you will be able to slowly cut off the connection between these hereditary nobles and their land and power. But for now, you should think about how to deal with the rebels. According to our intelligence, the enemy's commander is very cunning. He used boats and rocks to seal off the river. I'm afraid your general will be trapped in the swamp and unable to move. Isolde reminded him meaningfully. They want to stall for time. They want to watch the entire city starve. Eventually, there will be riots driven by hunger, which will shake my legal position. Unfortunately, they don't know that I still have a trump card. Villia pursed her lips, revealing a cold smile. Trump card? Which one are you referring to? Isolde asked with a half-smile. Of course, it's the mysterious army that you brought back that is between a spirit body and a physical body. I believe that they won't be trapped in the swamp, right? Villia's eyes flashed with a frightening light as she spoke. As the saying went, power was like the most terrible poison. It could corrode a person's heart and soul. As she had been a queen for a long time, Villia had gradually lost her original naivety and kindness. She thought from Queen's point of view. The so-called royal power was, in essence, a struggle for power and suppression of those who try to take it away from her. Too benevolent and kind a monarch would plunge the country into chaos. Nobles who lacked respect would take the opportunity to recklessly fight with each other and even erupt into fierce military conflicts. In the end, the country would be divided. Therefore, she never treated the nobles like her father, who used more conciliatory, divisive, or roping them in. On the contrary, she wanted to show her toughest side. Only then could she intimidate the other party and make them not dare to underestimate her. Politics had never been very friendly to women, especially in places where men's rights prevailed. The cunning Isolde undoubtedly knew how difficult it was for Villia to get to where she was today. He nodded seriously. No problem. As long as you need it, this army can appear where it should at any time. Great. Then I'll have to trouble you to personally make a trip and bring back a glorious victory for me. Make sure that no rebels can escape. I want to use blood to tell all the nobles that this is the consequence of betraying me and the kingdom. When she said this, Villia revealed a rare expression of extreme coldness. At this moment, she began to have the aura of an iron-blooded monarch, a powerful monarch who dared to fight to the death with all her enemies. Ha ha, no problem. I guarantee that none of the people who participated in this rebellion will escape by a fluke. But before I leave, there's one more thing I have to do. That is to catch the rats that have infiltrated these days. At the same time, I'll use this as an excuse to detain that self-proclaimed extraordinary prince. Chapter 1126. Chaos. Conspiracy. Turmoil. War. I don't understand. You can clearly use the most direct method to cleanse this planet and modify it according to your will. Why do you have to make it so complicated? Along with the familiar voice, Lord Gru once again appeared in the room on the top floor of the magic tower. Perhaps it was because he had transmigrated too many times, but his body was surrounded by dangerous and mysterious laws that constantly tore through the three-dimensional world, tearing apart time and space. Complicated? No, my friend, it's not complicated at all. Besides, it can also make you feel less bored. Zhang Cheng shrugged his shoulders with a smile. Do you know, before I obtained eternal life, I always thought that eternal life was an extremely wonderful thing. It gave me enough time to research and explore until I surpassed everything and stood at the peak of life's evolution. But now, I realize that I was wrong. Eternal life isn't as wonderful as I imagined. It means that there's no sense of urgency and it's easy to slack off. Now, I'm doing an interesting experiment. Let's see if I can make the Lord lose his eternal life and become like an ordinary life form, aging and dying. What? You're actually doing the same thing as him. Gru's beetle-like body trembled. The same thing? Who is he? It can't be another me, right? Zhang Cheng stroked his chin and asked with great interest. That's right. To a certain extent, he's also looking for a way to kill the Lord. But unlike you, he's looking for complete destruction, a kind of disappearance of the essence of the spirit, body, and soul. Now that things had come to this, Galu did not intend to continue hiding, and told Linley everything he knew. In his opinion, regardless of whether it was making the Lord lose his eternal life or completely destroying him at the root, they were all taboos without exception. What was even more frightening was that these two lunatics who had extremely similar natures had already resolutely taken the first step, completely ignoring the severe consequences. Oh, sounds interesting. Looks like we're really telepathic, aren't we? Zhang Cheng smiled nonchalantly. He wasn't surprised by this news at all. This was because from the first contact, he knew that the initiator had an extreme desire to kill the culprit who destroyed his home. The purest and most scorching flames of hatred couldn't be concealed by any schemes or schemes. Then do you know that he kept a fragment of your soul? Gru waved his insect-like appendages and asked with a serious expression. Ah, you're referring to the fragment hidden in my ex-girlfriend's soul, right? Zhang Qing obviously hadn't forgotten about this matter, but he didn't pay too much attention to it. In his opinion, that soul fragment had been separated from his body for too long. In addition, he had gone through many life forms evolution. A mere soul fragment from when he was a mortal was nothing at all. However, Gru didn't think so. He shook his semicircular head and explained, yes. Don't underestimate it. The soul was the most mysterious law in the entire universe. At the same time, it was also the most difficult law to understand and utilize. It gave life independent consciousness and wisdom, allowing life to evolve and surpass themselves. This is especially true for a ruler's soul fragment. As long as it's used properly, it can cause an unimaginable chain reaction. Please continue. I'm listening. Zhang Cheng straightened his posture and put away his nonchalant attitude. Although your soul fragment was cut off when you were a mortal, it still maintains an intimate connection with you. Think about it. If someone uses this soul fragment as a medium and resonates with your soul, what will happen? Gru's voice revealed a tremor that came from the bottom of his heart. What will happen? Zhang Qing's expression turned grave when he realized that the situation wasn't good. It's very simple. This will cause you to have a collision of consciousness and thoughts with the person you're resonating with. Then there's fusion. You'll eventually become one with him. Two separate consciousnesses will merge into one consciousness. I don't know if one of you will devour the other, or if both of you will lose a part of yourself and create a brand new consciousness. However, one thing is certain, and that is that both of you will bring unimaginable disaster to this universe. Gru didn't use any exaggerated adjectives, nor did he use his cadence to create an atmosphere of fear. He merely described what he thought would happen. Without a doubt, he didn't wish to see such an outcome, nor did he wish to bring irreversible harm to the universe. So, he hasn't given up on his plan to devour me. Good, very good. Should I say, as expected of another me? Hearing that the initiator's plan was still as crazy as ever, Zhang Cheng's eyes shone with intense excitement and anticipation. Tell me, what do you mean by making the ruler lose his eternal life? Gru clearly had no interest in getting involved in the grudges and conflicts between the two. He changed the topic and began to carefully probe for topics that interested him. After all, the ruler wasn't a life form in the ordinary sense. It wasn't even certain if the word life could be applied to it. First of all, although the ruler had a physical body, it had already jumped out of all dimensions. It was like an observer standing outside a box called the universe. Any method used in the box would be ineffective against them. Secondly, if a ruler destroyed another ruler's physical body, the latter's body would quickly be reconstructed with the help of the main string. During this process, no attacks or interference would be able to stop this process of rebirth. In other words, even a ruler wouldn't be able to truly kill a ruler. Finally, and most importantly, the ruler had already fused with the main string that maintained the multidimensional universe. Their bodies were equivalent to the main string, and if there was a problem with the main string, the universe in that region would completely collapse, forming something 10,000 times more terrifying than a black hole. In a distant era, there had once been a case where the main string had collapsed. No one knew what had happened. They only knew that at the end of that region, an absolute forbidden zone had formed. Anything that tried to approach, whether it was a celestial body or a ruler, would disappear without a trace, as if they had never existed. Apart from the ruler, other life forms wouldn't even have the corresponding memories, and they wouldn't even retain a timeline. It was precisely because of this that researching ways to kill a ruler was taboo. Even the craziest person wouldn't easily take half a step into this minefield. Chapter 11:27. Do you know what eternity is? Zhang Chen clearly did not answer the other party's question immediately. Instead, he brought up an interesting topic. The definition of eternity was completely different in different eras and different intelligent life forms. For example, the humans on Earth who had relatively short lifespans, a few hundred or even 1,000 years was considered a very long time in their eyes. They could even be given the word eternity. However, to some long-lived races who could easily live up to 1,000 or 2,000 years, eternity was something that lasted even longer. It even reached the level of one's spirit and soul. However, all of these were far from the essence of eternity. This was because time itself did not exist in the high-dimensional universe. It was only a measure used by the three-dimensional universe to measure the time from the Big Bang to the present. However, in reality, the universe was never a celestial body that was born from the Big Bang, slowly spreading out in all directions, and eventually perishing as many people thought. On the contrary, it was a cycle, a continuous process from expansion to compression, and then expansion again. However, to some low-leveled civilizations in the three-dimensional universe, they were unable to observe the changes in the high-dimensional universe at all. Therefore, they used the wrong concept of time as a measure of eternity. Gru was a ruler, so he naturally would not make such a low-level mistake. He stood where he was and muttered to himself for a moment. Very soon, he replied in a strange tone, "Eternity is a state. It's something that can't be destroyed or wiped out. No matter what happens, it will continue to exist. There's no doubt that in this universe, apart from the ubiquitous rules, the only ones who can be called eternity are us, the rulers. Even the gods who are said to control all sorts of extraordinary powers are merely ants under the rules. So, your point of view is that eternity is a state that can't be wiped out. To a certain extent, it represents a supreme power. Isn't that so?" Zhang Cheng smiled as he concluded. "That's right. Even though your understanding is slightly different from what I'm trying to express, there's no problem in general." Gru nodded seriously. "It seems that my point of view is a little different from yours. I think that eternity isn't an objective state of existence. Instead, it's a psychological change. For example, Every ruler firmly believed that they were the only ones who truly understood the true essence of the universe. They would never have feelings of self-doubt. Think about it. If one day you start to doubt yourself, deny yourself, and constantly think about those things that you have done in the past, can you still guarantee your immortality? Zhang Qing's eyes flickered with a strange light as he casually put forward a hypothesis. Indeed, one of the most important reasons why the ruler was able to stand at the end of the evolutionary path of all life was that he had become one with the main string, becoming a part of the supporting structure of the entire universe. However, the true secret that allowed them to maintain their eternal existence was never this. It was a kind of mentality, a kind of self-affirmation that allowed them to control the power of rules from the main string. Only by firmly believing that one was right and that all other sovereigns were wrong could one form an absolute domain with oneself as the center, a domain that resisted all external changes. And this kind of domain that was completely isolated from the outside world happened to be the true secret of eternity. In other words, if the sovereigns began to doubt themselves, the domain surrounding their bodies and souls would slowly weaken until it completely disappeared. Their consciousness would then be forcefully expelled from the main cord bit by bit. At this point, the ruler could be killed. This was undoubtedly the first time Gru had heard of such a novel theory. His emotions clearly began to fluctuate violently, and it took him a few minutes to barely suppress them. He asked in an uncertain tone, "This is the result of your research? Destroying a ruler's will from the heart, and then killing them?" Zhang Chung smiled and shook his head. "No, there's no need to be so nervous. I don't plan on killing anyone, at least not for now. What's more, this theory was just a speculation, and it was far from being put into practice. I need time to carry out experiments and prove that this theory is correct. How about it? Are you interested in joining? You're not thinking of using me as a test subject, are you?" Gru asked meaningfully. "Ha ha ha, of course not. We're allies, and at the same time, friends with similar interests. Don't worry, I won't do anything to you. Instead, I plan on finding that fellow who's been watching me from the shadows." With that, Zhang Cheng raised his head to look at the sky outside the balcony, as if he was staring at something. "I understand that there's no point in persuading you at this point, so go ahead and do it. Remember, don't be too arrogant. I admit that you have extraordinary potential, but a ruler isn't that easy to deal with." Gru released a barrier, isolating the magic tower from the outside world. Being cautious had always been his way of doing things. He didn't want to leak information at such a crucial moment and cause a series of huge changes. I've long been fully prepared for this. Do you see that tree of chaos that's constantly absorbing the planet's core energy? When it blossoms and bears fruit, that bastard who likes to pry into others' privacy will definitely be unable to resist jumping out. When the time comes, I guarantee that I'll give him a huge surprise. As the last word left his mouth, Zhang Cheng's eyes suddenly emitted a faint light like the stars. One of his hands gently pressed on a book on the table. Unlike most books, it was made of an unknown metal. The moment his fingers touched it, silver lines constantly flowed on the surface of the book. Staring at this strange book, Gru immediately realized that this young junior in front of him had already made ample preparations and would not stop no matter what. After a moment of silence, he still couldn't help but advise, "You'd better be careful. If possible, it's best not to kill our compatriot, even if he shows some hostility." "Kill? No, no, no. How could I bear to destroy such a precious experimental material? I'll seal him up, place him on the dissection table, and cut him into 8 pieces. I'll personally touch those blood vessels, nerves, and internal organs. If conditions permit, I'll even attempt to control him and turn him into an obedient puppet and servant. Just like you said before, this universe has been silent for too long. It's time to make some noise and tell all civilizations that an unprecedented upheaval is about to begin." As he said this, Zhang Cheng no longer concealed the surging darkness and madness in his mind. Wonderful Bookhouse. Chapter 1128. Gru left. Just like how he came, he didn't alert anyone. He left quietly without making a sound. However, Zhang Cheng knew that this sovereign who looked like a large beetle would definitely not keep a secret for him. It would not be long before his crazy plan was made known to the other sovereigns of the Chaos factions. These sovereigns would definitely take action, either to stop or support him. No matter what, he had personally instigated the prelude to war, causing the already dangerous universe to become even more dangerous. However, he did not regret it. In fact, he had long since forgotten what regret felt like. As he continued to affirm himself, he became like most sovereigns, becoming an absolute conceit. Even if he was wrong, he would be wrong to the end. He would kill all those who were right, and then he would be right. That's right. Did this not sound a little like the famous quote of Iron Chancellor Bismarck, that the truth was always within the range of cannon? However, in reality, the sovereigns were indeed special life forms that existed between objectivity and control. They represented some kind of ultimate consciousness of the universe, and, at the same time, they used their supreme authority to transform the universe in order to maintain this continuous cycle. This also meant that if there was a sovereign who could kill all the other sovereigns and then change the laws bit by bit, they would be able to impose their own wrong will on the entire universe. Sometimes, Zhang Cheng even felt that the reason why the sovereigns existed was not to maintain the status quo, but to compete fiercely with each other until the strongest was decided and became the supreme ruler of the entire universe. But now, for some reason, the sovereigns seemed to have reached a kind of microsecond peace agreement. They even completely forbade research on how to kill each other. This did not conform to the laws of biological evolution, nor did it conform to the inevitable result of dividing the two remaining intelligent life forms into the primary and secondary. There was no need to ask. Zhang Cheng was someone who hated peace. He longed for war, for slaughter, and for the roars and screams of despair that erupted at the moment of death. From the depths of his soul, he exuded the most primitive and deepest darkness, as if he had become one with the dark universe. Just when Zhang Cheng was once again alone in deep thought, the old general had already led the army to the shore 40 kilometers away from the Tilesburg River. He frowned as he stared at the river blocked by sunken ships and rocks. He asked in a heavy tone, "How long will it take to clear away all this rubbish? The damned traders have sunk at least 50 ships. Just the stones alone will take weeks to clear. What's more, we didn't bring any tools. I'm afraid we won't be able to finish it in 2 or 3 months with just our hands." An adjutant answered dejectedly. He couldn't help but feel dejected, looking at the soldiers who stood on the riverbank and stared blankly at the large swamp. It was clear that this sinister move had dealt a heavy blow to the morale of the army. In their expectations, the nobles' motley crew would be able to take down the castle within 2 or 3 days at most. Then, it would be time for legal plundering. This was especially true for the rebellious nobles' private property, which was no longer protected by the law. Valuable property, such as land, castles, and gold coins naturally had to be handed over to the national treasury. However, silver coins, cloth, statues, decorations, and so on could all be privately divided among the soldiers. But now, before they even reached their destination, the enemy had already blocked off the convenient waterway. If nothing unexpected happened, the only way they could go was through the great swamp that was fraught with danger. Staring at the protruding stone-like objects on the riverbank, the old general sighed helplessly. "Sigh. If we cross the swamp, we will lose at least a third of our soldiers, including those powerful steel golems. But if we stay and wait for the river to be cleared, we will undoubtedly lose the initiative in this battle and allow the enemy to make arrangements." "You are right. Please make your decision now. No matter what, we will continue to fulfill our responsibilities and bring Her Majesty a glorious victory." The adjutant patted his chest and bowed solemnly. Just as the old general was hesitating and about to give the order to cross the swamp, a portal suddenly appeared out of thin air. The next second, Isolde walked out from the other side, leaning on his staff. He first observed the situation around him, and then said in a half-joking tone, "Dear General, I think you must be worried about how to reach your destination, right? Of course, respected chief court wizard. Why? Do you have any good ideas? The old general's face revealed a trace of strong expectation. After all, spellcasters were always mysterious and powerful, and magic could do countless things that ordinary people could not. Ideas? No, I don't have any good ideas. Even if we use an army of spellcasters, it will take a long time to clear so many shipwrecks and stones at once. However, if we can't clear the river, it doesn't mean that we can't reach the city. If you don't mind, I would like to speak with you alone. With that, Isolde glanced at the adjutant who was close by. The latter was quite tactful and immediately bowed and left without a word. After he was completely gone, Isolde explained with a faint smile, "Actually, you don't have to worry about marching. Her Majesty the Queen has already prepared an army for you, and it can appear directly in front of the city gates at any time. Right now, the only thing you have to do is to join me and destroy the rising confidence of those rebels. Let them understand how miserable the fate of traitors is." There's another army? Why haven't I heard of it before? The old general was stunned on the spot. After all, he was one of the few confidants of the young queen and knew about the mobilization and stationing of almost every army in the kingdom. Ha ha! This army is a little special. In the entire kingdom, only the queen and I know that it is a sharp blade that can hit the enemy's vitals at any time. It will not be used unless it is absolutely necessary. Come, follow me. I will show you how different this army is from the rest. Believe me, you will like them. Having said that, Isolde pulled the old general's arm and quickly chanted a spell loudly. Under the gaze of countless eyes, they slowly disappeared on the spot. When the old general recovered from the dizziness brought about by the teleportation, he found himself in front of the sturdy walls and gates of Tillsburg Wonderful Bookhouse. Chapter 1129. Ew, are you crazy? How would you bring us here? The elderly general stared at the heavily guarded city walls and gates, his entire body trembling uncontrollably. If it weren't for the fact that he was afraid of embarrassing the queen, he would have taken off his armor and helmet to prevent the patrolling soldiers from noticing him and humiliating him as a captive. However, Isolde was fearless. He raised his head and looked at the guards who had yet to react to what had happened. He shook his head with a faint smile. Crazy? No, I'm not crazy. On the contrary, I want you to cooperate with me and put on a good show here. Do you still remember the army I mentioned earlier? I'll hand them all over to you now. As soon as he finished speaking, he carefully took out the scroll from his bosom and activated the powerful magic stored in it. In an instant, a huge portal to another dimension appeared out of thin air, and thousands of humanoid creatures with a silver glow walked out from it. In the blink of an eye, an army of around 10,000 well-equipped soldiers appeared in the open space in front of the castle. Even though they didn't make a single sound from the beginning to the end, the visual impact was enough to shock everyone who witnessed this scene. Who can tell me what the F***CK is this? An officer standing on top of the city wall asked the soldier beside him with his mouth wide open. I'm sorry, sir. I'm not too sure myself. Those two people seem to have used some kind of magic to suddenly appear outside the city. It looks like they're going to attack the city. The soldier stuttered as he expressed his opinion. Damn it. Put down the iron gates and close the gates. Sound the alarm. Go inform the Baron that the enemy has arrived. The officer reacted quickly and decisively gave a series of orders. In order to prevent chaos, he even personally chopped down 2 people who tried to escape in panic. After all, this rebel army was a motley crew of private soldiers from dozens of noble families. They might be able to fight well against a third-rate garrison, but once they faced the elite army of the kingdom, their chances of victory were basically zero. Therefore, from the very beginning, the initiator had planned to attack the transportation hub and then defend it to the death. Only by relying on the protection of the tall city walls could they offset their disadvantage and fight a long defensive battle. Baron Murray obviously attached great importance to the sudden appearance of the enemy. He didn't even have time to put on his armor before he rushed out. He looked down at the mysterious army that was flickering with white light. After observing for an entire hour, he asked in a very nervous tone, How did these damn things appear? It was summoned. Look, do you see the two figures behind me? According to the soldier's report, it should be them. The officer pointed at two black dots about a kilometer away from the city gate. Baron heard this and immediately raised the monocular in his hand. When he saw their faces clearly, he gasped and exclaimed in a low voice, Isolt and Tess, Villia's most trusted right-hand man. What? Are you sure? Please take a closer look. 2 days ago, our men saw Isolt lingering in the king's court. That's right. Taser should also be blocked in the middle of the river, along with the rebel army he led. For a moment, many of the nobles who participated in the rebellion were extremely flustered. They couldn't help but panic. In order to attack Tilgsburg as quickly and efficiently as possible, they only gathered an army of less than 3,000. They were afraid that the news would leak out. Even after the attack, the troops that came later arrived one after another. The total number of defenders in the castle did not exceed 5,000. However, outside, there were more than 10,000 humanoid creatures flickering with white light. Whether it was discipline or equipment, they were far superior to the defenders. Shut up. Do you think I would be wrong about such an important target? Baron Murray turned around and glared fiercely at his allies. His face was solemn. So, we're about to be besieged by this army? As the initiator of the rebellion, the palace noble finally couldn't help but stand up and ask carefully. If there was anyone who would be the least likely to be forgiven among all the nobles who participated in the rebellion, it would undoubtedly be him. He secretly sided with a foreign monarch, instigated a rebellion in his own country, and even wanted to force the queen to give up her power and marry a foreign prince to become a plaything and puppet. No matter which one it was enough for him and his family to die 10,000 times. Yes, inform everyone to be prepared to fight to the death. Right now, we have no way out. Either we defend the castle or we die under the enemy's sword. I hope that everyone here can be like a true noble. Even in the face of death, don't abandon courage and glory. After saying that, Baron Murray pulled out his sword and ordered the officer behind him loudly. From now on, all the soldiers will be divided into 2 shifts and guard the city walls day and night. Once there are signs of the enemy's attack, immediately sound the alarm. Also, take out all the goods in the warehouse that can be used in the war and distribute them. Especially food. He had to ensure that every soldier had enough meat and alcohol. The former can improve their physical strength, and the latter can eliminate fear and anxiety. I have a feeling that the real test is coming soon. As you wish, Your Excellency. The adjutant bowed and moved as fast as he could. In less than half an hour, the huge military fortress was in a state of combat readiness. A large number of catapults, ballistae, and ballistae were aimed at the motionless, mysterious army outside the city. They were waiting for an order to launch a storm of attacks. In contrast, Isolt, who was outside the city, was very relaxed. He smiled and asked the petrified old general, "How is it, my dear general? Are you satisfied with the army that Her Majesty has provided?" "Yes, of course. But I have a question. Are they ghosts? Why do their bodies always appear and disappear?" Taser turned around and asked excitedly. "No, they're not ghosts. They're a special species created through magic. They will 100% obey any orders given. Remember, my friend, Her Majesty gave you this trump card not just to quell the rebellion. She needs to use this as a warning to all potential enemies, a lesson that will leave a deep impression. Betrayal must be paid with blood." Isolt revealed Villia's true intentions. When Taser heard this, his pupils shrank. He carefully probed. To what extent does the so-called price of blood have to be? Haha, have you heard of massacre? It's the kind that tells the soldiers that after the city is breached, they can kill civilians, rape women, and plunder without restraint. Anything that is not normally allowed can be done from the moment the order is given. Isolt smiled and gave a creepy hint. Chapter 1130. Massacre the City. Taser couldn't help but shiver when he heard this familiar yet foreign term. Memories that had been sealed away for a long time started to surface. As a veteran who had climbed up from the lowest rung of society, he had personally participated in quite a number of massacres. Some of them were his experiences as a mercenary when he was young, while others were his experiences as a low-level officer of the kingdom. No matter which one it was like a nightmare that constantly tormented his conscience and soul. Perhaps in the beginning, recklessly venting the dark and evil desires in the depths of one's heart brought about a strong sense of satisfaction. However, as they gradually calmed down, every participant would more or less feel guilty, uneasy, and fearful. They would even constantly question themselves as to why they had lost their rationality like a wild beast. What he didn't expect was that the queen he was loyal to would give such an order one day. "What, are you afraid?" Isolde seemed to have noticed something, and a playful expression appeared on his face. Taser quickly shook his head. "No, I'm not afraid. I'm just thinking about some bad things." "Are you sure you want to destroy all the guards in Tillsburg and kill them all? Many of them are also citizens of the kingdom, and were only coerced by the nobles who started the rebellion. If it's possible, I hope to persuade a portion of them to surrender and let them redeem themselves with merit, using their blood and achievements to wash away their sins." "Ha ha! General, your naivety makes me laugh. Keep in mind that this wasn't a war in the ordinary sense. Instead, it was a war that would make all the nobles in the kingdom realize that the pitiful amount of power they had was like a sand castle in front of the queen. It would collapse with the slightest touch of the tide. Furthermore, the kingdom is no longer the same as before, allowing them to use their privileges to escape punishment time and time again. In the face of the law, both nobles and commoners are equal." "Equal? Equal? Nobles and commoners are equal?" Taser's eyes widened, as if he couldn't believe his ears. There was no doubt that Isolde's words had overturned the worldview and values he had built up over a long period of time. Ever since he was a child, his parents had instilled in him the idea that nobles were superior to commoners and that nobles were independent of the legal system. Many things that could cost a commoner their life, in the eyes of nobles, only required an apology or even some compensation, and they could easily escape the punishment of the law. However, now, a powerful spellcaster who had personally sent the princess to the throne was telling him that the kingdom's nobles would be the same as the commoners in the future, and would no longer enjoy any privileges. This undoubtedly gave him a great shock. That was right. It was shocking. For the first time, Tess felt what the queen really wanted to do. What would the future of the kingdom look like? That's right. Equality. Don't you feel it? Is Her Majesty the Queen suppressing the nobles and promoting a large number of commoners like you? Isolde bluntly removed the last layer of concealment. Although many people with high political sensitivity had already sensed this tendency, this was the first time they had said it out loud. "So that's how it is." Realization dawned on Taser's face as he placed one hand on his chest and bowed deeply. "Thank you very much for your reminder. To be able to serve Her Majesty is the greatest honor in my life. Please be assured that I will take care of these rebels for Her Majesty and use their blood to warn everyone of the consequences of betrayal." Isolde nodded in satisfaction. "Very good. I'm glad that you have such awareness. Now go and do what you need to do. I'll stay here and enjoy the wonderful show." "Then, can I begin to give the order to attack the city now?" Tess turned around and stared at the mysterious army that had been standing still since they appeared. As a general, he was eager to test the strength of these seemingly valiant soldiers. "Don't be hasty. Wait a little longer. Haven't you noticed that our enemies are beginning to panic? Give them more time to immerse themselves in their nervous and uneasy emotions. That way, when destruction and despair descend, it will produce the best deterrence effect," Isolde suggested unhurriedly. After all, these special soldiers that were in between spiritual and physical bodies did not need to eat, rest, or sleep. What provided the energy for their actions was precisely the various extreme emotions produced by life. Especially on the battlefield, all the fear, excitement, courage, sadness, and excitement of the enemy would be transformed into the strength of this army. "Understood. Then we'll wait for 3 days. 3 days later, we'll attack the city." Taser accepted the suggestion thoughtfully. He was not a fool. He knew that since the chief court mage dared to give such a suggestion, He must have great confidence in the army. In addition, they had enough numbers and quality to crush the enemy, so there was no need to be too hasty. Just as the mysterious army was methodically sealing off the various exits of the fortress, Baron Murray, who was hiding in the sturdy castle, frowned and complained to his closest friend, "Damn it, I think we're in big trouble this time. Spellcasters, I need some spellcasters to fight against those strange enemies outside." Spellcasters? Are you kidding? Every spellcaster is a talent carefully cultivated by each family. They're either direct descendants of the family, or the most loyal of the generations of vassals. It's impossible to even get them to the front lines, let alone command them. The court mage rolled his eyes in annoyance. After all, soldiers were only cannon fodder. No matter how many died, as long as the foundation was still there, they could continue to recruit. However, spellcasters were different, not to mention the huge amount of gold coins needed to cultivate them. Their magical talent alone was enough to keep many people at the door. Therefore, the nobles treated their spellcasters like treasures. Their status was only second to the head of the family and the first in line of succession. No, it's different this time. Didn't you notice? Vilya has used a trump card that she's never used before. This means that she won't care about the noble's reputation at all. She'll uproot us and kill all of us. We have no way out. No matter what price we have to pay, we must defend the castle and ensure that no ship can pass through. Baron Murray was like a gambler who was about to lose all his money, roaring loudly with bloodshot eyes. Chapter 1131. Although many people said that failure was the mother of success, and that lessons could be learned from failure, which would eventually lead to the path of success. But in reality, as long as there was even the slightest chance of success, it was believed that no one would like to taste the bitter fruit of failure. Moreover, the self-comforting and self-deceiving tricks mentioned above were just excuses used by the losers to appease and cover up their ugly state. Baron Murray was obviously unwilling to accept the fate of failure. He wanted to use all the available resources at hand to make a final gamble. But unfortunately, he was only a temporary commander elected by the Noble Alliance after all. He had neither enough prestige nor the corresponding authority to convince the masses. The result was self-evident. None of the nobles were willing to contribute the spellcasters they had painstakingly cultivated. Instead, they sent letters back home through various birds, asking their wives and children to flee with their valuables. As for an extremely small number of nobles, they had already begun to secretly collude with each other and planned to secretly betray their allies. At the critical moment, they would turn around and fight for leniency through meritorious service. After all, the so-called Noble Alliance was originally a loose interest group. They would gather together because of benefits, and, similarly, they would also turn against each other because of benefits. Especially when there was no hope of victory, the despicable side of human nature would definitely be displayed incisively and vividly. Time passed day by day, and 3 days passed in the blink of an eye. Although Tess had been resisting the urge to give the order to attack, he had not been idle these days. He had continuously used the reinforcements that had rushed over from all directions to test the soldiers that were between the physical and spiritual bodies. In the end, he discovered that ordinary swords and sabers could not really hurt them at all. In just 3 days, at least 2,000 scattered private soldiers of the nobles had been slaughtered. The corpses and heads were displayed proudly in front of the city gate for the soldiers on the city wall to see. This had greatly damaged the already low morale. Now, not only had Tilgsburg not been able to cut off the river as originally planned, it was like a sharp dagger piercing into the heart of the queen. Instead, it had been surrounded by 3 layers of enemies. Other than the occasional limited information that could be exchanged with the outside world through the birds that they had tamed, they were basically deaf and blind. Everyone who had some understanding of war understood that if they lost their source of information, it would be a terrible thing. Not to mention anything else. Just those unlucky fellows who had been completely annihilated would crawl out of the world of the dead and shout the word injustice. One had to know that the news they received earlier was that everything was going smoothly. Otherwise, they wouldn't have rushed over to join forces. They were afraid that if they were late, they would be excluded from the loot distribution after the victory. However, it was a pity that plans could never keep up with changes. Who would have thought that the rebel army that had been stuck in the Great Swamp would arrive at the gate of the stronghold overnight, and even seal off all contact with the outside world? Looking at the terrified expressions of the guards on the city wall, the old general asked without turning his head, "Master, 3 days have passed. Can I begin to give the order to attack?" "Of course. But don't forget, when the battle is over, other than the two main culprits, I don't want to see a third person alive," Isolt reminded coldly. "All of them? Even servants and merchants are no exception?" Taser subconsciously frowned. Isolt smiled calmly and asked, "Do you think the servants and merchants who are still inside will stand on our side at this time?" "No. They are all in cahoots with the rebels. Those who are truly loyal to the Queen and are loyal to the kingdom have already returned to the royal city to report the news. Don't worry and do it boldly. Her Majesty the Queen will be your strongest support. As for you, you will become the kingdom's hero and the ruthless executioner in the eyes of the enemy." "Understood." Taser nodded lightly and pulled out the sword that symbolized his authority from his waist. He shouted at the motionless army, "For the Queen, for the kingdom, attack! Kill all the rebels! Bring their leader to me!" Boom! Tens of thousands of flickering soldiers materialized and slammed the weapons in their hands on the ground. In the next second, they turned into spirits again and passed through the city wall at an unimaginable speed. They appeared beside the guards out of thin air. This sudden and fierce attack was obviously beyond the expectations of the demoralized defenders. They could not believe that the city wall that they had placed high hopes on was completely useless. The enemy even treated it as air and decoration. No, don't kill me. I don't want to die. I surrender. I surrender." In less than 5 minutes since the start of the full-scale attack, the guards on the city wall had collapsed. Countless soldiers threw away the weapons in their hands and knelt on the ground, trying to escape death in this way. However, the spirit soldiers did not care at all. They still strictly carried out the orders of the commander to kill. Even if the other party knelt on the ground and cried bitterly, saying that he still had family and children waiting to be fed. In the blink of an eye, fresh blood, broken limbs, and internal organs had dyed the city walls of Tilgsburg red. Be it the nobles or the ordinary soldiers, none of them were lucky enough to escape. Not only them, even the few cooks who were in charge of cooking and the female captives who were captured as tools to vent their desires had become cold corpses without exception. Cold, heartless, efficient. This group of creatures that were created with the law of death and the souls of mortals had fully demonstrated what the ultimate efficiency of killing was. They were different from the undead who hated the living and would only swarm forward in a mess. Not only did they have the ability to think independently, they also knew how to form a formation and cooperate. Thousands of guards were almost wiped out in less than 10 minutes. Only a few elites retreated to the upper echelons of the castle to resist. Damn it, what kind of F***king monster is this? My sword can't hurt them. A knight cursed angrily as he waved his sword and shield and retreated step by step. The sturdy armor on his body had now been slashed several times, and his shield was almost deformed. However, no matter how powerful his martial arts were, it was as if he had pierced air after hitting the enemy a few times. There was no effect at all. Despair. True despair. Even the bravest person would inevitably fall into panic when facing an enemy that they could not kill. If not for the fact that they knew that the enemy would not leave any captives behind, they would probably be willing to throw down their weapons and choose to surrender. They would not be struggling like this just to live for a few more minutes or even a few more seconds. Chapter 1132. An hour later, when the last resistance fell into a pool of blood, this short and efficient siege had already come to an end. Seeing the family knights and soldiers who were loyal to him being brutally killed by the enemy one by one, Baron Murray, who had been a high-ranking official in the kingdom's army, trembled slightly. Of course, it was not because he felt fear, but because of indignation, anger, and shame. He originally thought that the reason why the enemy did not attack immediately was that they did not have the confidence to take down the heavily defended military fortress in a short period of time. So they adopted the strategy of surrounding but not attacking. But now, Tess had used practical actions to give him a hard slap in the face, and his face was almost swollen. The defensive strategy that he thought he was invincible was simply as laughable as a clown in the eyes of the enemy. But this was not the most important thing. The most important thing was that he understood that the family that had been passed down for more than 300 years was going to end with his generation. It was not difficult to judge from a merciless slaughter of those strange soldiers that there would not be any aristocratic privileges this time, and they would not be allowed to pay a fine to pardon the death penalty. Good afternoon, Your Excellency. I'm afraid you didn't expect us to meet so soon, did you? Isolde stepped on the red carpet, soaked in blood as he walked into the room, his tone full of ridicule and sarcasm. Even though he was originally not very interested in politics, and the only reason he was involved was to serve his master, but unknowingly, he began to like the feeling of controlling the fate of others, especially those who thought they were invincible from the clouds into the abyss. It's you. It's you again. What are you and Villia trying to do? Do you intend to kill us all, the nobles? Before Baron Murray could speak, the palace noble who was about to wet his pants from fright could not help but jump out and criticize loudly. Even though he had been trying to show the noble demeanor of being fearless in the face of danger, his two trembling legs betrayed his true state of mind at this moment. No one was not afraid of death. Not many people could still remain calm in the face of death. Those who could do this either had great ideals, harsh revenge, or a character that was so determined that they would not be moved by anything. Obviously, the palace nobles were far from being able to do this, so their pretentious look was extremely funny. Kill all the nobles? No, she and I only want to take back some of the nobles' privileges. The reason why we are here today is because of your greed for land, wealth, and power. In the 700 years since the establishment of the kingdom, you have become accustomed to a high and mighty position. You have forgotten why your ancestors started the war and why they conquered this rich land. Her Majesty the Queen had only carried out a little reform to lead the country out of its predicament, but you couldn't help but jump out and even collude with foreign forces to try to overthrow the royal power. May I ask, if you were the king, what would you do to such a traitor? Isolde had no intention of showing any mercy. He went straight to the core of their conflict. No, it's not our fault. It's you. If you didn't put that woman on the throne, the whole country would still be the same as before. The palace noble roared angrily. Ha! If I hadn't put Villia on the throne, the kingdom would have fallen. You so-called nobles will all be uprooted and exterminated by Kelvin. Your land will be confiscated. Your wealth will be rewarded to those madmen who have done meritorious deeds, and your wives, lovers, and daughters will become their tools to vent their desires. Remember, idiot, the times have changed. Everything is no longer as slow as before. It wouldn't be long before this continent would be engulfed in endless flames of war. Either adapt to the new rules or be eliminated by the rolling flood. Now, I declare that you have been eliminated. Men, send them back to the capital. Her Majesty the Queen needs a public execution to announce to the world that the era of nobles is over. With that, Isolde waved at the spirit soldiers who were waiting at the side. The latter didn't say anything and directly rushed up to break the palace noble's arms and legs. He even forcefully dislocated his chin to prevent him from committing suicide due to the humiliation. In contrast, Baron Murray was much calmer. He raised his head and asked in a self-deprecating tone, "Our families will all be captured and executed one by one, right?" "That's right. Do you have any last words?" Taser replied with a complicated expression. Since both of them were from the military, they had worked together quite a bit. They even admired each other a little, so he didn't speak ill of him. "No, I don't. The winner takes all. Since I failed, I have to bear the responsibility of failure. The winner is never wrong. Only the loser is wrong. I've understood this principle since my first year in the military. Don't worry, I won't commit suicide, nor will I do anything stupid. I'm a realistic person, and I'm willing to accept the arrangement of fate." Baron Murray was rather straightforward. He took off his sword on the spot and threw it to the side, waiting to be taken away by the spirit soldiers. Interesting. If I remember correctly, you seem to be very accomplished in the field of military affairs. Why did you give up such a bright future to participate in this insurrection that you have no chance of winning? Isolde asked with interest. Baron Murray smiled and spread out his hands. I had no choice. You should know where my family's land is, and we've been allied with the families that started the insurrection for generations. If I refused to join, then they would use all sorts of methods to force me. From the beginning, I had no choice. Other than fighting to the death, what else could I do? You had no choice? That's a good description. To be honest, I'm starting to feel sorry for you. If you hadn't planned to attack Tilgsburg and cut off the capital's water transport line, I might have been able to fight for a chance for you. But now, Isolde shook his head helplessly. The meaning of his words was self-evident. As mentioned earlier, someone had to be responsible for the war. Since the winner couldn't make a mistake, then the loser had to bear all the responsibility. Neither of the two masterminds could be pardoned. Villian needed their heads to give an explanation to the people of the capital who had run out of food, and also to warn the nobles who were still on the fence. It's indeed a pity. I'm looking forward to seeing it with my own eyes, and even participating in the endless wars in the future. I'll use victory after victory to leave my name in history. Unfortunately, there's no if in this world. Perhaps dying like this isn't a bad choice. Promise me, be quick when you kill my family. Don't let them suffer too much. Wonderful book house.